safety answering point. So what that means is that we answer direct and indirect 911 calls for emergency service and assistance. So the dual part is the fact that we have a wireless center and we have a regional emergency communication center. And we are a division of the Massachusetts State 911 Department. Our mission at the North Shore Regional is to serve as the communications link between all of our member community citizens and their public safety agencies. Our vision is to exceed national standards and best practices by providing high quality, high tech, and up-to-date 911 services. And our values are to be caring, supportive, innovating, and serving to the communities that we serve. Our organizational structure at our regional center is comprised of a director, a deputy director, an operations manager, a training and quality assurance coordinator, supervisors, and telecommunicators or dispatchers. Call takers and dispatchers are what make up the telecommunicator group. So who are we? As Greg said, I'm Allison Della Sola. I am the Director of PSAP Operations for State 911 Department. Under that role, I am the Director of the North Shore Regional 911 Center. To my right is my Deputy Director, Christopher Ryan. Hiding behind me is my training coordinator and quality assurance manager, Katrina Shamshak. And Leanne Delp is our operations manager. Unfortunately, regrettably, she could not be with us tonight, but she will be at the open house, so hopefully everyone can meet her then if you haven't met her before. So that's our admin structure. Our governance. So we are governed by an intermunicipal agreement between the communities we serve and the State 911 Department. Within that structure, we have advisory boards that are made up of our member departments. So we have police advisory boards, and those are all of the police chiefs from all of our 6 communities. A fire advisory board, which is all the fire chiefs from our 6 communities. An administrative advisory board, which are all of the department mayors and or town managers and administrators. And an executive advisory board, which is essentially at-large members for from those 3 previous boards. Our facility. We have a $12 million purpose-built facility that's approximately 11,000 square feet. I am going to turn over to Chris just to talk a little bit about the facility and get into some specifics.
Okay, so as far as the facility goes, we have 2 communication rooms. So speaking what Allison said with the dual PSAP, one room is basically for the wireless operations, the other is for the regional operations, as well as the training and conference rooms, which we've actually turned into a computer lab for training for the Manchester police and firefighters. We have several administrative offices. We've established a quiet room, so if a dispatcher takes a very critical call, they can need to decompress for a minute, they can go not ready and go down to that quiet room if they need to. We've also got a kitchen and break area, as well as another break area out back with a picnic table and grill for them. As far as the facility, everything was built on redundancy over redundancy, so we've got multiple sources of different, like power, for example. We've got power coming in from Middleton Electric, and then we've got 2 different generators powering up the building should we lose that shore power from Middleton. We also have 2 UPS, or uninterruptible power supply systems, battery backups basically, that power everything until the generator kicks on, which takes 30 to 60 seconds, let's say. We also have set up multiple internet service providers, so in the event that, say, Comcast goes down, for example, we've got 3 other internet service providers that will power up our building with that service, including a couple of wireless options in there. So everything was built on redundancy over redundancy, because we can't, we're mission critical, we can't afford to go down, so we have these setups in there. Going on that aspect of the mission critical, we've got 2 different HVAC, heating and air conditioning units that power up the dispatch operation room, as well as a couple that do the server room. So again, one can get taken down for maintenance while the building's still perfectly functioning going forward. Within the 2 different rooms that we have that I talked about, there are 17 answering positions. 10 of them are in the regional room, 7 in the wireless room. 9 of those positions in the regional room also have full radio capabilities. And we are connected into the state Commonwealth of Mass. It's called COMEARS, which is the Commonwealth of Mass Interoperable Radio System. And this provides us a whole plethora of radio channels that we have access to, and we can tap into mutual aid, police, fire, and EMS resources from basically across the entire state. Also, that provides us the ability to, if we need to evacuate from our building, we can go to our backup center and we can plug into all of our resources and talk to Manchester Police and Fire whether it be in talking to them from Boston or Andover, which is our alternate, and the whole operation would be seamless from there.
And those things are regularly maintained and tested. We're one of the few centers that have, in real time, actively tested our COOP, our Continuity of Operations Plan, where we simulated, we have to evacuate this building and move our entire operation. And we did that over 3 days in October of 22, 21?
21, I believe it was.
21, and tested the plan to make sure that it would be a seamless transition without any loss of service. And we're happy to say that we successfully did that. Obviously, we learned a lot from it, and we hope to be doing it again in the future. We're trying to do it every couple of years to keep it fresh and relevant, because you never know. Thank you. So we talked a lot about the wireless center, and I think this is one of the main points of confusion for a lot of people about what we do at the North Shore Regional. So in addition to our regional operation for our 6 communities, we are one of the 3 centers under State 911 that answers cell phone calls that are, for lack of a more sophisticated term, they don't know where to go, right? So they don't have good, what we call Annie-Alley, so they don't have good identification information to send them directly to the community where they need to go to be dispatched, for first responders to be dispatched. So the state has the system in place and software in place to make sure that all calls are answered, right? We can't hit a cell tower and not know where we're gonna send the call. So there are 3 centers. I happen to be in charge of 2 of those centers, and one is under the roof in Middleton at North Shore. The other one is down in Framingham in GHQ at State Police. And so we answer those, it's called a pre-PSAP. We answer those calls and ask the vital questions about where they need to get and transfer them then to the appropriate PSAP that would dispatch. So that is part of our operation that's entirely separate from our regional dispatch center, staffed separately, and we share it under the same roof, and it's under the same oversight, and that's part of our responsibility as a division of State 911. So that's what we do. That is where we answer 200 to 300,000 wireless 911 calls for a population of about 1.8 million people, and that's because we cover Essex County, the majority of Middlesex County, and Suffolk County up to Boston, and then the center in Framingham covers another portion of the state, and then there's Northampton, which covers a lot of the western part of the state. It's kind of just divvied up geographically for those calls. And we are a backup center to the Framingham and vice versa for those wireless calls, because the state has a system, a call never gets lost, it always gets answered, someone's always there to answer it. So that is one section of our operation. However, the section of the operation that is more relevant for tonight is our Regional Emergency Center, which you are now a part of. So this is where we answer and fully process 911 calls for emergency assistance in Amesbury, Essex, Manchester by the Sea, Middleton, Topsfield, and Wenham. Those are alphabetical, there's no preference. This includes radio dispatching units for police, fire, and ambulance. We also receive and direct otherwise process-related non-emergency calls for these communities. So what you would consider your business calls. So we also handle those, as most dispatch centers do. We are 24/7 across 3 shifts. We are staffed by 31 telecommunicators, so dispatchers and call takers, 8 supervisors, and then the admin that I had previously mentioned. Calls for service. Our telecommunicators handle calls for service that range from day-to-day business and informational calls to emergency calls in need of law enforcement, fire, or ambulance response. Each dispatcher is trained and able to process the call, determine the nature of the emergency, dispatch the appropriate units, and give pre-arrival instructions to the caller while the responders are en route. So we're fully EMD certified, and we do provide EMD within our agency. We don't outsource that. Our training program. Our personnel are required at the very beginning to complete 88 hours of certification training. So this is standard for most dispatchers across the state. They have to take the APCO Public Safety Telecommunicator course, it's 40 hours. They have to take 32 hours, 32, thank you, of emergency medical dispatch certification. They have to be certified in CPR as part of their EMD certificate, and they have to have certification in the Next Gen 911 call answering software. So those are those basic certifications. In addition to this, we have 56 hours of classroom training for every one of our employees. Classroom trainings inclusive of computer-aided dispatch software, local geography for all of our 6 towns, ethics, police and fire basics, CGIS, and incident command systems training. So classroom training, and then after classroom training, they moved into what we would call on-the-job training, so that hands-on training. So these are in hours, yes? 280 hours of call taker training, 240 hours of police, fire, EMS dispatch training, 200 hours of mentoring, for a total of 720 hours of on-the-job training. So we take our training very seriously at our center. When you're dispatching for 3 disciplines, for 6 communities, 6+ communities hopefully in the future, we do a lot of on-the-job training. It can take anywhere from 4 to 6 months during the entirety of a probation of a new employee. We also have a very robust QA/QI program, quality assurance and improvement. It's designed to meet the standards recommended by the APCO International Standards Development Committee and approved by the American National Standards Institute. Our QA program addresses 3 key areas of employee performance: adherence to procedures, call quality, and job knowledge. The principal features of the QA include a review of at least 3% of all of our calls for service. I don't know if you realize that's a lot compared to most agencies, so we take that very seriously. And we do 100% of our calls with catastrophic loss or high acuity, so your P1 calls, we do 100%. We also have key performance indicators and statistics that we have created and adhere to at our center. We have strict guidelines on how rapidly calls are to be answered and then subsequently dispatched. Guidelines follow applicable national standards. And for some of the things we do, there aren't national standards available. They don't exist. So we've created, with our advisory boards, with our working groups in our communities, standards, internal standards that we want to hit, that we want to comply with, because we always believe it's best to achieve and hit a certain metric. Our compliance is tracked and reported, and any perceived issues are addressed between telecommunicators and supervisors, as well as during operational training meetings to go over overall performance. We publish these statistics and standards on our website, and we also regularly disseminate them to our members and stakeholders. So that was the very high overview of us at a glance. I hope that members of the Manchester community will come visit us on March 22nd. We're having 2 sessions, 10 a.m. to 12 p.m. and then 5 to 7 p.m. Keep me honest, those are the hours? Yes, I believe those are the hours. So we'd like people to come and see the center because we think the best way to get familiarity, to feel comfortable, to know who is that person on the other end of the phone, because it's not necessarily, although it will still be Jake, if people are used to hearing Jake, it will still be Jake. One of your employees who was a dispatcher here in Manchester decided to apply, and we have hired him, and he is now working with us as a regional dispatcher for 6 communities in addition to 5 in addition to Manchester. But anyway, to come to our center, to see the operation, to see it is to believe it, to meet the people is to have the confidence in it and to get familiar. So we encourage everybody to join us on that day at one of those 2 sessions. And then if, we'll probably most likely have some additional ones as the weather gets nicer and such too, if the need is there. So now we'll just talk a little bit about how we did our project. I'm sorry,
Allison.
yeah,
No, I
absolutely.
just wanted to know, if people want to attend, do they need to call and let someone know? How
So-
do they do that?
I provided a flyer, I believe, for you guys to disseminate as needed. Yeah, just a quick email, only because I'm looking for head counts on certain things, and we're looking at capacity in terms of, making sure we have enough refreshments, and just making sure we have an estimate of who's gonna come. It's okay, though, walk-ins are fine as well, but they don't have to call or anything, just a quick email saying I'm interested is all I ask.
You've mentioned several times police, fire, emergency medical. We also have a harbor department.
Yes, that falls under, we would consider that falls under with the police department. We deal with all of that, yes. All of the same services that your dispatch was providing, we have taken those on.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Sorry, those are just very generic disciplines. We say police, fire, EMS, those are the overlying.
Animal control.
Animal control, they all fall under, to us, harbor master, those all fall under, we would consider within police. I understand and respect that they're their own divisions, but we would just.
And it's something that's important to bring.
Of course, yes, yeah. And we're familiar with that because we have other towns that also have harbor masters, and we've been, familiarity with that area. Thank you. Yeah, you're welcome. Anything else on us before I move on to how the onboarding has gone? talk quickly and fast, so just interrupt me whenever you need to. It's the Italian in me, I apologize. So the onboarding, so project planning. So we began planning with Mr. Federspiel and with Kathy as a liaison of this board, with Chief Fitzgerald and with Chief Cleary since September of '22. And we had a dedicated onboarding project team, which consisted of the people I just mentioned, as well as the three of us and Leanne Delt, my ops manager. And we constructed a very comprehensive project plan with milestones and deliverables. We actually had several project plans. We had a very comprehensive one that we used internally. We had a high-level timeline, which we shared with yourselves and the public. And we had monthly team status meetings to track progress, provide updates, and identify needs as we worked on that project plan implementation. Obviously, you are aware that the original plan, the go-live date was originally going to be July of this year. However, due to unanticipated needs, luckily we were able to move that up to last Wednesday. I feel like I'm a little like behind the curve because we already went live. Usually we do this before go live, but you know what? We're making it work and it's actually working really well. So we'll get to that. So the phases of that project plan included education and outreach, and then staffing, procurement needs, and stakeholder meetings. And then in implementation of software, hardware, preparing databases, implementing operational changes. And so during those first three phases, I can't stress enough how good the working relationship was amongst the onboarding team. And that's a lot of credit to Chief Fitzgerald, to Lieutenant McCoy, to Lieutenant Crosby, to Chief Cleary. I mean, there was a lot of things we had to get through in a few months. And like, I want to give a lot of credit to Chris as well, because they really got into the weeds, hours and hours they spent together, lots of emails, right, Chief? Lots of phone calls, lots of meetings to make sure we were covering all our bases, making sure all of the Manchester's needs were being met, making sure that Manchester was fitting in with the other 5 communities and what they'd already established as, you know, expectations and processes of the regional center. And it was a very good experience on both sides. I mean, to the point where we actually changed some things of how we operate based off of suggestions from Manchester. So having a new community in to give that fresh perspective was excellent. And the chiefs came right into the fold, into the advisory board meetings with the other chiefs. And it's just been a great working relationship with all of our communities and all of our staff at the regional. So I'm not sure we would have been able to go early if it wasn't for such a really great symmetry between all of the parties involved. Everybody really cared about the end goal and making sure that we were doing a good product. So I can't stress that enough. It means a lot to us. And that includes talking about the implementation of software, hardware, and all those operational change policies and procedures and all of the nitty-gritty that you would need for day-to-day operation. And then the next phase is where we kind of, we're training end users for Manchester currently. So your police and fire are now, this week as we speak, going to the training for the new CAD and RMS software that we use. And over the last several months, we really put a push, January and February, to train our dispatchers, knowing that we were gonna go early. So of course, that was sort of the most important thing we could do, was to make sure our dispatchers were trained and comfortable. And I'm gonna get into that in the next couple of slides, some of the details of how we did that and what we did. So it was the training phase, and then go live, which is where we are now. And then post go live, we'll have continued outreach, like the open houses and any sort of meet and greets we need. Quality control. What's quality control? Quality control is, now we're live. Something was weird or hinky on a call. Chief Cleary gives us a call. We look into it. We go, okay, we adjust the policy. We figure it out. That's what quality control is between the departments and ourselves. And then lastly would be data conversion. And data conversion is essentially because you're changing over from a previous software for your RMS and your reporting software to our new one. And that's a whole thing where you have to hire somebody to do all that good data conversion. So now we'll go into talking about the training. Okay, so prior to training any of our dispatchers, this lovely old woman behind me spent 3 months coming here and sitting with Manchester, sitting with the chief, sitting with the lieutenants, sitting with the dispatchers, and really getting insight into how Manchester operates. What did they do differently than we do at the regional? What did we do the same? What might be similar to like a town like Essex that we already do, or Wenham or something like that. So she spent 3 months observing and working inside Manchester Dispatch. With that, it was sort of a train the trainer model, right? Once I had my lead trainer and lead dispatcher, really the lead dispatcher, know those ins and outs, we were able to formulate the training plan for our dispatchers. So then we started with our classroom training. Every single one of our dispatchers had a 4-hour training class. That training class was taught not just by Katrina, but also by members of Manchester Police and Fire. And those were the best days, I'll tell you, because not only did we learn a lot about the town, we started to build those good relationships across the radio, so to speak. And I can't thank the 2 chiefs enough and the 2 lieutenants enough for their continued effort to come to us and really, help us get prepared for this. In addition, we have continued shift trainings, newsletter articles, PowerPoint presentations, quizzes, and tests on things like geography and policies and procedures. We've been doing those nonstop, and we won't stop. We still do all of those things for our current 5 towns. Katrina is serious about training. She is serious about Con Ed. Our dispatchers are always constantly learning and evolving. And then another huge aspect of the training was the ride-alongs. So every single one of our dispatchers has gone on a police and a fire ride-along throughout the town of Manchester in the last 2 months. Right? Because seeing it is so much different. Seeing it with a Manchester first responder is even better, right? A lot of our dispatchers are good. They go and drive around on their own to get familiar. They take their jobs seriously. They don't want to have a call and not know what they're talking about. But doing it in addition with a first responder is even better. You get that inside information, you get that familiarity, you get those, very specific Manchester historic, things. So, we've conducted all of those. Now, somebody asked me, is that it? Is that the last, you asked me, John, is that the last time you ever do a ride-along? No, we still send our dispatchers to ride-alongs on our other 5 towns as well as a refresh, because things change, towns evolve, right? New developments happen, stuff changes. Well, some towns. Anne's like, no changing. So we will continue to do that as well. And then we're hoping, because scheduling is very difficult and we're asking a lot of them both right now, but we're hoping that in the near future we could possibly have Manchester Police and Fire come and do like little sit-alongs or even just little visits, just to be in the dispatch center, to see the faces, to see the equipment, to see the setup, and really feel like they've gotten comfortable with it as well. So I'm gonna stop talking because that's a lot of talking, and I feel like sometimes questions are better than presentations.
What is CJIS?
Oh, great question. Katrina, why don't you jump in?
It
This
stands
is
for
your house.
Criminal Justice Information System. So
Yep.
essentially, it's the database we would run vehicles or people through, look for warrants, registrations, things like that.
Thank you.
We love acronyms.
I was gonna say,
There are a lot of
I
acronyms.
come
never
from a
ending.
military family. We love them too.
I swear I learn a new one every day. Working for the state, I'm like, I didn't know that one. I learn a new one every day.
Well, I before we go around to the rest of the board, I just want to say thank you to everybody. You all just have done such an amazing job getting this up and going, and go live already done, and I know it couldn't have been done without our chiefs and the rest of the departments. So thank you all very much. John Round?
Yeah, and I want to echo Becky's comments as well. It's been a very complete job, and Allison, you fit it in 30 minutes, what some people would take an hour to do. and
I've
you
learned
covered-
less is more sometimes.
No, but it's very complete, and I think it's reflective of the job that everyone here in this whole team has done. We see everything's going along here very smoothly, and it probably even went more smoothly than you expected, because what we thought was a target date wound up 3 or 4 months earlier. And I know that as time goes on, these processes, everybody's a little bit different. And for the next town that you do, and there will be other towns, I'm sure that maybe there are other challenges, who knows? But apparently there were a lot of very good fits here and it accelerated the whole time. Maybe that's part of the fit, but I think a lot of it has to do with the people that are involved. So I don't have any more questions. I'm looking forward to having all of this complete. And I know that you still have some more work to do over the next coming weeks, but it'll be, well, actually, it never ends. I'm sorry.
Mhm.
It's the business we're in.
Yes.
No, I've
Brian?
got nothing, I was impressed, as long as the two chiefs are happy, I'm happy.
Me too.
Kathy?
No, I just want to echo my thanks. You run a very impressive operation. And the way the project was run, I talked to you at the beginning. I have a lot of experience with this kind of stuff and it's very impressive. The way your focus on continuous improvement is very impressive. So thank you again to everybody, our Manchester team, the team at Middleton. My only question is, you do still have some work to do.
Yeah.
Is there anything you need from us? Do you need any additional support or?
I was gonna say, all the stuff that we have.
You can talk about the outstanding things really quickly. I think we've gotten, and we know we have that support. I don't think there's anything
Okay.
necessary. I do want to thank you for your insight too, because Chris and I did learn a lot from you too as well in terms of planning, so incorporated into it. So thank you. We appreciate the help. And do you just want to talk about, there's some infrastructure things that we're still working on, like things that were procurement that we
Right.
couldn't. I asked you to talk about it and then I talk. See how I do that? Go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, no, I mean, it was, we only have a few outstanding items really is, some expanding the radio coverage up to the Magnolia area, which we're working on. We're actually doing site visits on Friday, so that we should get bids on that hopefully. MDT computers we'll be working on, data conversion we'll be working on.
Things that we were planning on post go live.
And fire station alerting.
Anyway,
Yeah.
right? Yeah. So important, very important things.
Oh, yeah.
But some of those things that can't, the procurement process, especially with the state, is what it is, and we can only expedite so much. Luckily, I have very nice bosses who are helpful in expediting what we needed that was critical to go live 3/1 instead of 7/1, so.
That's great. Now,
Yeah.
and I know, data conversions can be really ugly. And they're the less glamorous part of the job, but they're critically important and the accuracy is
Absolutely.
important. So if, you guys run into staffing issues or whatever,
Okay.
you just raise the flag because that stuff, like I said, it's the less glamorous stuff, but we're not done with go live and
Yeah.
when we go live and there's a lot of work left to do. So thank you again though, really appreciate it.
Thank you, Kathy. Ann?
Yeah, thank you. This is amazing. You managed to go live in a little more than half the time you anticipated. Rarely seen anything like that happen. And do you know approximately how many calls a day you're getting from Manchester?
What do you think, Katrina?
Emergency calls or calls in general?
Such a loaded
Yes.
question, calls are.
Both.
Yeah, total.
Either, total.
I mean, it's sort of all over the place, like we were kind of tracking, like the first day, we didn't really get any calls, no 911 calls came in. The second day, I think we got 2 or 3. And then like the day of the snowstorm, I know we got probably 20 calls about the snow ban. So it's kind of been all over the place, especially with the weather.
Thank you.
Yeah, I anticipate that will increase as the summer months approach us in Manchester. So
Oh, yeah.
maybe a blessing in disguise
Oh,
that we
yeah.
went live early as well. And some things happen for a reason. So I was like, oh, go live on 7/1. Why did we think that was a good idea? All the planning and nobody raised the flag about the 4th of July weekend in Manchester? Like, what were we thinking? So, we'll take that as a win, silver lining going early. Like,
Yeah.
getting our feet wet before, the busy season.
Greg?
No, I'm good. It's been a great effort. I really applaud. The state has really stepped up. Allison, you and the whole team, you've gone above and beyond, really. You've provided extra services and extra support, so much appreciated. I do just want to acknowledge the great work that our current dispatchers have always provided us.
Yes.
This was not about their performance at all. This was really all about just putting in place a more robust system that we couldn't do on our own. regardless of the talent that we have. So they'll continue on for the next, through the end of the fiscal year here to help us out in this transition. And their work is certainly appreciated.
We want to thank them as well because they were very hospitable and helpful to Katrina while she was here. So they definitely have been key to the transition as well. So thank them for us.
Here. All right, Allison, Chris, Katrina, thank you all very much. And hopefully you'll get a lot of people who come for the open house.
We
And the
encourage
refreshments.
And the refreshments.
They just keep saying refreshments. Maybe people.
Food.
That's good.
Girl Scout cookies.
Is that the way to people's hearts? I have a connection.
Goodness.
Gee, really?
Thank you very much. We do appreciate it. We do hope to see everyone there on the 22nd.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for coming in.
Greatly appreciate
Thank
it.
you.
And I think if we can hold off on the governance project update and committees, we have people here for, thank you, chiefs. Coastal zone management, coastal vulnerability action plan. We have some people, I think, on the,
Yes, they'll be presenting via Zoom.
Yep.
And so tonight we have an update on the work that's been underway for the last few months. The most recent work, we were able to secure a grant from the state, and we have hired Fuss & O'Neill as a consulting firm to help us analyze what sort of impacts we can anticipate with sea level rise and bigger storms on our village core area. And so we're working on this vulnerability action plan. In other words, what action steps should we contemplate to better protect us from what's coming down the pike? And so that's the focus of the study that's underway now, and we'll have an update on that in the second half. But before getting into the analysis that the folks at Fuss & O'Neill have been able to do over the last few months, I wanted to first introduce Professor Charles Waldheim. Professor Waldheim is with the Graduate School of Design at Harvard University, and he and his team have been working for the last two plus years with all of Cape Ann communities on a number of studies for us, again, with support from some state grants that we've been able to secure, and also some contributions that Gloucester and Manchester and the other communities have made. One of the first things that Professor Waldheim's team undertook was what's called scenario planning, but did a scenario based on a Category 3 hurricane hitting Cape Ann. And so tonight, the professor will be able to walk us through a summary of that scenario and what things we might anticipate if such a storm were to hit us. It sort of sets the stage for a lot of the work that Fuss & O'Neill is doing for us as well. So, Professor Waldheim, with that introduction, I hope that set the stage properly, and I turn it over to you.
Thanks so much, Greg, and Sue and everyone there. Thanks for your hospitality. Congratulations to Sergeant Gilson. That's quite an accomplishment and a long tradition of family service. So it's really an honor to join you on this evening. As Greg mentioned, for the past couple of years, we've been working with a group, the Cape Ann Climate Coalition, folks at Town Green, the Water Alliance, and others. And we've been working with them and the 4 municipalities to begin to find ways to think about change over time as a way to think about climate, as a way to think about decisions about infrastructure and the public realm. And so the work that we've been up to is work that we've done through my research group, which is called the Office for Urbanization at the Harvard Graduate School of Design. So at the design school, we are architects, engineers, landscape architects, planners, ecologists. We're concerned with climate, and we do quite a lot of work advising communities, helping to think about and to understand the choices that they might face as they go forward. We've been working on this for the past couple of years, and what I'll share with you here is one particular thread of that. We use a form of scenario planning. You know, scenario planning is a way of thinking about the future and complexity that's been endorsed by the IPCC, U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, a range of other organizations that deal in the climate space. The key thing here is our work is not really trying to, you know, accurately predict the future. We certainly don't wish ill upon anyone on the North Shore, nor storm for that matter. But the goal of scenario planning is it will tend to reveal non-obvious outcomes, you know, second and tertiary systems. So we think of this as a kind of stress test in a way. We organize this work in a variety of formats, and what we'll share with you tonight is a portion of an inward-facing website that we can make available to you, folks in Manchester. That scenario 0, this future synthetic storm event of 2038 will be, you know, most of my remarks this evening. But we've also added what we call scenario 1, looking at options for adaptation. We've also developed a look at, you know, strategies for net zero housing, adding housing density, knowing that housing is one of the great challenges on Cape Ann, as well as a study looking at recovering waste energy. As I mentioned, this work is organized through a web platform that I wanted to introduce to you just briefly. Hopefully you can see that now. So this is a website that we'll share with you where we've organized a variety of materials. In the first instance, if you see at the bottom left here under cultural landscapes, we began with 2 studies that might be of interest here. One is a study looking at kind of ethnographic field work on Cape Ann. My colleague Gareth Doherty and 2 of his doctoral students spent several months living on Cape Ann, interviewing residents, developing a series of interviews, and from that they've developed both an understanding of the cultural landscape, but also a series of composite characters that help us to think through the way that Cape Anners and people in Manchester think about climate and how they think about change over time. We've also developed a series of adaptation strategies. You can see here, which is really a kind of summary of various strategies we've seen, both best practices, precedents, and literature review. So these are resources that I won't spend a lot of time on, but I wanted to make you aware of that begin with a series of strategies and a series of observations that have informed our work. This scenario 0 that we mentioned has this quality of a kind of narrative in which we begin with imagining future storms. We know that people on Cape Ann have been living with nor'easters and tropical storms and hurricanes for centuries. That's going to continue. But we know that the tropical storms, the hurricanes, will tend to increase in frequency and intensity of energy with respect to climate change. We've, from that work, then identified what we think of as 27 key infrastructures. Some of them are biotic or natural systems. Others are, hard infrastructures, transportation, electricity, water systems, and the like, many of which are specific to Manchester. And as Greg mentioned, a part of this has been looking at the inner harbor and the village core and thinking about change over time. Underpinning this work, of course, is a lot of research that we do on thinking about future adaptation and knowing that, of course, the rates of change with respect to climate, both storm events and sea level rise, are uncertain right now, but they are certainly trending in a very particular direction. We've also focused our work looking at the places that historically will tend to flood most often. For example, lands that were historically not land, that were filled historically, tend to be places of inundation. Historic wetlands will tend to revert. For example, Manchester's village core is not the only place that was developed on former salt marsh or wetland areas, but for example, those marsh and wetland systems will tend to be increasingly vulnerable over time. And then, of course, the transportation networks, the roads and highways, knowing that Manchester and other towns on Cape Ann are really only kind of fragilely connected back in terms of, the kind of network of mobility. Life support infrastructure, critical infrastructure, but equally electricity, water systems, all of these things came into our view as a way to think about how change in the climate might affect Manchester going forward. We've also got a deep dossier that we'll share with you on the website of a history of hurricanes and storm events. Of course, you've been living with this for some time. The Great New England Hurricane, so-called of 1938, which was in September of 38, was one of the kind of primary models in our mind. It's sort of the best, closest approximate of the storm event that we've modeled, which is essentially a Category 3, which made landfall on Long Island and then southern Connecticut at about 120 miles per hour. We've got very good historical data on the kinds of damage that storm event did on Cape Ann. And because of the nature of the rotation of this particular form of tropical storm hurricane, that puts enormous pressure on the south shore of Cape Ann and Manchester and Gloucester Harbor in particular. We also, of course, looked at 54's Hurricane Carol, as well as Hurricane Edna, and the idea of multiple storm events in a particular season. We know that these storms will become increasingly intense, and Cape Ann has been living with these kinds of storms for a very long time. It's an incredibly resilient place, both the people, but the physical geography of the place is literally built out of granite. Having said that, the flood projections, both sea level rise, but also storm surge models that we work with suggest that you'll be increasingly facing, both sunny day flooding or nuisance flooding, so-called, but also subject to increasing threats through storm events. A part of what we've done in our work is to model, in this case, one particular storm event. This is predicted for August of 2038 to hit, again, the southern shore of Long Island and the southern shore of Connecticut just after Labor Day weekend. And from that, we developed with data from Woods Hole and our friends at MIT who model these things, an interactive process whereby we can begin to study in a kind of time synchronous way changes in barometric pressure, projections of tide, in this case, a high tide event with respect to a king tide, a certain lunar condition, and then studying, well, what's going to happen in the marine environment, what's going to happen across Cape Ann, and then to predict, based on the data that we have, the kinds of stresses, the kinds of threat. We understand in this case the push of saline water, saltwater intrusion, changes in pressure and inundation that will tend to subside and deteriorate roads, but ultimately also the wind speed and projectile developments from a storm like this. You can see here a series of narrative points along the way in this storm in which critical evacuation routes are activated, the town's municipal response, emergency response plan is put into place, that kind of thing. We know that you're very well served by your first responders, by the good folks at the North Shore Emergency Comm Center we just heard from. So we know that you're already well prepared compared to most municipalities. Having said that, our goal is to use this exercise to think about change as a kind of surrogate for choices that you might make going forward. Of course, Route 127 passes through Evans Creek into Beverly, and the marsh there floods. That might create public safety issues in terms of evacuation. Downtown, in particular, around School Street, is quite susceptible to flooding, as you may know. And again, evacuating for certain people, especially the elderly or those that are less able than others to move, become challenges. Now, with respect to Manchester in particular, of course, we've also done more detailed look specifically at the village core. In this case, we're looking at the same time frame, the same storm event. The trackage and right-of-way of the MBTA right-of-way, of course, is a central preoccupation. It's already a consideration that I know that you felt long and hard about. The impingement of the MBTA tracks and the Bascule Bridge on the harbor produces a very particular hydrological condition. Combining that with the wastewater treatment plant, obviously that's another critical issue in the historic village with respect to the boatyard. All of these are connected, obviously, but in the context of a storm event, of course, people will withdraw, will shelter in place, may in fact evacuate if necessary. And of course, these floods will be temporal, that is, they will tend to then revert back to the norm and leave in their wake some amount of damage. Of course, the impacts are not limited just to the inner core, but we studied that as a place that has perhaps the most vulnerability. We looked at, among other places, Gulf Oil and Beach Street as a kind of key kind of infrastructural node. We understand the kinds of pressures that storm events produce on both built structures, infrastructures, subterranean, oil, gas tanks, and the like. And we're interested again, not to predict precisely what might happen, but rather to use the best historical information that we have available, as well as the best, scientific knowledge and data to understand, well, what kinds of pressures might we be facing, and how might that be changing the physical environment. For example, looking at Raymond and Ocean Streets, the paving, the subsidence we've learned about in terms of the kind of erosion of streets. It's not just one storm event, but of course a series of storm events over years, over decades that contribute to choices that you'll face with respect to the maintenance of these infrastructures, and ultimately the relationship between the uplands and how that water washes down is also, of course, of interest here. In this case, of course, Manchester is a microcosm of a set of challenges across Cape Ann. Our mandate has been to look at Cape as really a synthetic kind of biophysical region. Having said that, we're also, of course, interested to then think about choices you might make going forward, and we have been developing a series of recommendations. Those are not yet public. We're working with our steering committee to work through those just now and hope to be able to make them available publicly in the near term. And I'll put here on this slide, and I'll make available in the chat just after I close, the URL, capeann.officeforurbanization.org, and the username to log in with and the password, so you can take a look at this at your leisure or on your own time. What I want to end with is suggesting a little bit of what Greg mentioned that we're working on for the coming year. This work is continuing over the course of 2023 with a focus on the natural ecosystems or the natural biomes of Cape Ann. We know that the natural systems on Cape Ann, the beautiful landscapes and incredible wetlands and upland forests and coastlines, these are a part of the reason that Cape Ann has become so meaningful, so important for so many of us. And we know that those resources, those ecological resources, will be key to Cape Ann and Manchester's ability to withstand the effects of climate change, but also to be resilient, to bounce back in the wake of those challenges. So over the course of this year, we'll be reaching out and meeting with folks across Cape Ann to understand, to evaluate the status of those ecosystems, but also to make recommendations about how to bolster their health and to render them more readily adaptable to the face of climate change. So thanks very much. Look forward to chatting with you about this and working with you over the course of the coming years.
Thank you. Questions from the board? Starting with John Round.
No, I don't think I have any questions. I'm really curious. I mean, this is kind of an overview, and as
Right,
he
it's
gets
really
in
a
here,
taste of what information they've
it's just-
collected, and
if-
like, we'll publicize and have a link to the website so that people can see this more
Right,
in-depth at their leisure.
Right. The specifications, specifics weren't necessarily in there, but he's saying if something like that happens, well, at some point in time, the model will say, this is gonna be affected. I saw the running commentary under there, so a
Right.
lot of things
Mhm.
were there, but I didn't read fast enough.
Right,
Yeah.
yeah, no, we were expected to.
But I look forward to taking another look at the URL and, further findings here.
Thank you. Brian?
No, I'm just gonna book a trip right after Labor Day on 2038. Go on.
Yeah,
And save the Legion, that's all I care about, is save the Legion.
well, that's a frontline deal.
Kathy?
As we go through this, I think it would be advantageous to kind of bring a couple of other projects kind of together with this. So for example, Chief Fitzgerald shared with us an emergency preparedness plan, right? And so I'm just trying to understand, previously we had talked about doing a tabletop exercise, right? And that's a time commitment. But I just wanted to better understand what your thoughts were, Greg, around kind of bringing these related elements together. Because I think also there's intersection with the facilities master plan that we're expecting this summer, and the harbor master plan, right? So all these things are coming together, and it might be nice to just kind of put together a one-pager on, here are the interrelated things that we
And how
gotta
they're
look
weave
at.
together.
Yeah, even if it's just a first draft, because some of the items that I just mentioned are very time-consuming. You know, we'll wanna schedule that in with other plans.
Yes.
Just
Yeah.
some thoughts there. But it's very illuminating, nice work that the team is doing, and I'm not sure I feel like saying I look forward to the next step. I'm interested in hearing what the recommendations are.
What I can say is, I think that you might know, but compared to the work that we do with other communities in the US and around the world, you know, I think Manchester is well served by great leadership, well-educated citizenry. I mean, it's been a remarkable collaboration to date, and I look forward to you know, sharing and working, integrating with the other studies you have ongoing, obviously, and look forward to that opportunity.
Thank you. Anne?
I have no questions.
Okay, nor do I at this point in time. I will do a little more in-depth looking.
So we'll go on to part two.
Okay,
So,
part two.
thank you, Professor Waldheim, much appreciated, and we welcome your continued involvement here. So part two is hearing from Fussin O'Neill, engineering firm that is taking a more detailed look at the village core area. And the project leader for Fussin O'Neill is Alex Maxwell, and he is with us this evening. Alex, should I give you sharing rights or the Chelsea?
That would be great. Yeah, you can give me sharing rights
Okay,
there, Greg.
all right.
Thank you.
All right. Where's co-host?
Few co-hosts right now.
All right, sorry about that.
No, it's great.
So-
Worked well.
So Alex, I'll let you introduce your team and
Yep.
have you go from here.
Great, thanks, Greg. Well, hello, everyone. Good to see the board again. For those of you that I may not have introduced myself to just yet, my name is Alex Maxwell, and I'm a resilience planner with the engineering firm Fussin O'Neill. And I'm also the project manager for the Manchester by the Sea Coastal Vulnerability Action Plan project. And tonight I'm also joined on the call by another one of my colleagues, Chelsea Zakis. Chelsea, you want to say a quick hello and just introduce yourself?
Yeah, thank you. Hello, my name is Chelsea Zakis, an environmental planner based in Fussin O'Neill's Boston office. Really great to be here.
Great, thanks, Chelsea. And today we're also joined by our teaming partners from Woods Hole Group, represented tonight by Joe Family. Joe, do you want to say a quick hello?
Hi everybody, Joe Family, Climate Sustainability Team Lead at Woods Hole Group.
Great. So that's the team here, and I am gonna just advance through our slides. Some of this, I'll apologize in advance for those of you that maybe saw our presentation during the kickoff meeting. Some of this will be familiar to you, but I figured just to reorient everyone with the project, that just go over a little bit of the sort of overarching goals and our timeline, and then we'll dive into the details of some of our more recent work here. But as has been discussed at length even tonight, and as you well know, Manchester experiences frequent flooding in the downtown and inner harbor area that puts much of the critical infrastructure in this area at risk. So with support from a coastal resilience grant from the Office of Coastal Zone Management, or CZM, the Coastal Vulnerability Action Plan will provide a roadmap to reduce coastal flood risks and then increase coastal resilience. Building on past studies, this plan will be developed as part of a phased approach to establishing more action-oriented alternatives for both neighborhood and site-scale mitigation measures to increase resilience in the downtown and inner harbor area. The planning process that we've established starts with an assessment of existing conditions, which then feeds into an updated vulnerability assessment for the downtown and Inner Harbor area. And that's what we'll be focusing on during tonight's meeting. But after the completion of these assessments, our team will then begin to develop and analyze alternatives through the spring for both those neighborhood and site scale mitigation measures. And then these key alternatives will be summarized in a draft recommendation plan by early June and then finalized into a final draft of the plan following wider consultation with the local community towards the end of June. It's worth noting, and my colleague Chelsea will note again towards the back end of our presentation, that during each phase of the planning process, we'll be hosting a public engagement meeting to keep the community apprised of progress on the plan and also solicit additional feedback on key deliverables, such as our alternatives analysis and the draft plan that we'll be developing. So I'll just briefly unpack these first two steps before handing it over to Joe to present some more on the results of the field investigations and vulnerability assessment. So as was mentioned before, during the first phase of the project, we'll be focusing on this existing conditions assessment, and this consists of several tasks, including compiling maps from existing resources such as utility plans or past surveys, collecting quantitative data on past flood elevations within our project area, confirming resource area delineations along the harbor edge, and then importantly, also collecting critical elevation information on low points, including first floor elevations and other low points along the harbor. The second phase of this project, which is the current phase of the project that we're in, was designed to really build upon the 2006 town-wide vulnerability and risk assessment with a narrow focus on the Inner Harbor and downtown. So an updated vulnerability assessment has been conducted to assess both current and future flooding and water surface elevations, along with projected habitat change as a result of sea level rise. And additionally, as you'll see on the subsequent slides here, GIS-based inundation maps and figures have also been developed for several different planning horizons, including 2030, 2050, and 2070. And then we've also coupled that with an asset-specific assessment that was conducted for buildings and infrastructure within our study area. So now with that, I think, Joe, I've primed you here to cue us up for a little more detailed look into these first two phases and what we found through the field assessments and through the vulnerability assessment. So I'll kick it over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Alex. Good evening, everybody. So I'll just, there's a lot of detail, I think, in these slides, and I'll try and keep it high level and happy to answer questions at the end so we don't take up too much of your time. So we, our vulnerability assessment, as Alex mentioned, is focused on sea level rise and storm surge in combination. And to do that, we started with an existing conditions assessment that included some data collection. The one that we're showing here is that we are documenting the resource areas, the coastal resource areas within the Manchester Harbor, so that we know, what are the regulatory constraints for any proposed adaptations. So what we did was we took a 2015 resource evaluation and wetlands delineation, expanded it on the western side of the harbor to kind of wrap around the marina, and then did a preliminary assessment over by Masconomo Park. Some of the other things that we'll be talking about later that contributed to the vulnerability assessment were also part of the existing conditions assessment, were some tide gauge deployments, as well as critical elevation surveys for buildings and other infrastructure. So as I said, we're looking at sea level rise and storm surge, coastal hazards. So first part of that is to unpack sea level rise. So this is what we've been seeing in the past from the Boston tide gauge, not too far away from Manchester, the best available regional data that we have. And over the past 100 years or so, there's been approximately a foot of sea level rise over that time. But what are we expecting in the future? So we're fortunate here in Massachusetts that the state is working hard on these issues and providing the best available information for climate change planning. EEA and CZM have worked collaboratively to develop sea level rise projections for the state, and they're available for all the different tide gauges that NOAA runs in the state, primarily Boston, Woods Hole, and Nantucket. And these inform and form the base of our flood risk model, which we use for assessing storm surge. What you see here is the range of projections of the elevation of mean sea level. So into the future, primarily our planning horizons that we work with are 2030, 2050, and 2070. So you see that there's a range of numbers going up and down when you look up from any given out year. And that's because there's some uncertainty with, how both greenhouse gas emissions are going to play out, as well as what are the potential contributions from ice sheet melt. So 2030, anywhere from 0.8 of a foot up to 1 1/3 foot, all the way out to up to 2.5 feet as soon as 2050, and up to 4.3, 4 1/3 feet as soon as 2070. If you read that sort of across, you can also bracket those projections. So that 1.3 feet of additional sea level rise from today may be equivalent, if you're looking at the high scenario, maybe equivalent to what we're seeing on the intermediate scenario on the bottom on a 2050 horizon. So we like to stress that the future is uncertain. There are certain things that we know a little bit better than others, and so the recommendation is usually to be as flexible as possible in implementing solutions and be ready to change as conditions change. So those were general projections of mean sea level for Boston, but how's that going to play out here in Manchester Harbor? So we have, through our Massachusetts Coast Flood Risk Model, tidal benchmark projections. So taking that mean sea level elevation and seeing what that means in terms of the future mean low water, mean high water, mean higher high water. And what we wanted to do, because we're fairly confident in those numbers in the open coast, we want to see what happens when we get into some of the more tidally restricted areas and see if that actually changes the projections. So Woods Hole Group deployed 2 tide gauges, one in the outer harbor, one in the inner harbor. And I believe they were out for almost 2 months. We usually do 1 month to capture pretty much all of the tidal constituents that represent conditions in the area. What we found was there is a little bit of attenuation, so not all of the tide was coming through underneath the Bascule Bridge and into the inner harbor all the time. And so the projections for the elevations of mean high water and mean low water were slightly adjusted for the inner harbor. But overall, the conditions in the outer harbor and the inner harbor were fairly the same when you look at the extremes of the tidal range. So the average of the higher high tides, which is what we'll be talking about next, was pretty much the same. So those numbers there are elevations in feet, reference to the NAVD 88 datum. Next slide. So what do those numbers look like on the ground? So we mapped these out using the latest available elevation data from the state. This is LIDAR data. And just on a very basic level, symbolizing those elevations, this is called a bathtub analysis, just to get an idea of where you might expect that high tide flooding in the future, given those sea level rise scenarios. What you see is, this is a built-up harbor, not a whole lot of expected change on that 2030 time horizon, because there are a lot of elevated bulkhead areas and elevations. 2050, a little bit of edge flooding, especially on parking lots and a little bit up into the Sawmill Brook area, as well as a little bit onto the park on Masconomo Park area. But then 2070, that elevation of 9.4 feet NAVD 88 really starts to impact some of the working waterfront areas, the parking lot, the wastewater treatment plant, as well as the residential area behind Beach Street. So that's the high tide flooding component of this. The next thing we want to look at, we've actually already seen some of these patterns recently. Towards the end of January, while we were out doing our critical elevation survey, we did see some flooding in these areas. We checked that elevation because we had tide gauges in the water, and it was very close to that projected 2050 condition. And the patterns of flooding kind of ring true to that. So sort of a window into the future. So next, that's sort of the everyday potential condition. We want to also look at more episodic events, so storm surge. Again, we have a pretty good record of water levels in this regard from the Boston Tide Gauge. What you're seeing here is the historic high water levels, extreme water levels for that tide gauge over its period of recording. And that red bar that goes across the top that kind of slants up as you go further in time is showing you the 1% annual chance event based on that calculating the statistics and striking a trend line through that data. That's 1 in 100 years is like what you're familiar with from FEMA, but really it's not 1 every 100 years. It's a 1% annual chance. Prior to the January 4th, 2018 storm, the storm of record was the blizzard of 78 for this area. That winter storm Grayson eclipsed the blizzard of 78 by a little bit and became the new storm of record. As Alex will show you on the next slide, it had some pretty significant impacts for Manchester. These pictures here are actually from the Christmas storm last December. So that actually turned out to be the 8th highest water level recorded at the Boston Tide Gauge. It was an elevation of 8.3 feet and NAVD 88, so less than Winter Storm Grayson, obviously, but still had some impacts. You see the fire station moving its equipment out of a flooded garage bay. So that's sort of where we've been and what current storms are doing, but what does the future hold when you have higher sea levels and more frequent and more intense storms. So we have the Massachusetts Coast Flood Risk Model was developed by Woods Hole Group and MassDOT and other agencies at the state level to project water levels given sea level rise, evolving storm climatology, and different aspects of the landscape, including elevation. It includes tides, winds, waves, run-up and overtopping. It's a hydrodynamic physical model. The primary output, which you'll see in some later slides, are flood probabilities, so the annual chance of flooding, and the water surface elevation that corresponds to those different probability levels. We can also develop a host of other parameters that are useful for planning and design. So here's the results of the flood risk model for our study area. And what you see as we step through time, this is 2030, 2050, and 2070, is that the extent of potential flooding increases over time. You see that, that pink edge, which is a 0.1% 1,000-year recurrence interval, very, very low probability, high intensity storm, but expanding into the landscape. But you also see those higher probability events, the blues, the 25 and 50% annual chance events. Those are also expanding into some developed areas. A lot of those are consistent with some of the areas that we talked about when we talked about high tide flooding. So to give you a sense of those water levels in comparison to storms that we're familiar with, we mapped out all the different projected water levels for the different, for the range of probabilities. So you have that going on the left-hand column from 0.1%, 1,000-year recurrence interval, to the 50% chance, the light blue, so that's like the every other year kind of thing. One thing to point out there is that light green associated with the 1% annual chance event. That's sort of your future FEMA 100-year storm, if you will. What we saw is that, Winter Storm Grayson and the blizzard of '78, those water levels were pretty close to the projected 2030 1% annual chance water level. So we're kind of already in a new normal. Those storms were, as I said, impactful for Manchester. There's an example of a photo from the parking lot by Town Hall and the harbor from your one of your resilience building workshops reports. That 9.6, 9.65 foot water surface elevation is pretty close to that 2030 1%. But what you see is a storm of that magnitude, as you crosswalk through that chart, is increasingly probable over time when you have higher water levels due to sea level rise and higher intensity and probability of storms. I think the other thing to notice there is, as you sort of step across any one of those probability levels, the water surface elevations are increasing. So a 1% chance event in 2030 increases about 1.5 feet along the 2050 time horizon, and an additional almost 2 feet by the time you get to 2070. So kind of keep that Winter Storm Grayson in mind as your benchmark, but there may be higher water levels in the future. Next slide. Another point of reference is the perfect storm, 1991, which was about 1 foot lower. And as you see, that's associated with some pretty high probability levels in the near term and the long term. So 10% under 2030 and over 50%. So that's sort of like a semi-annual storm in the mid to long term. Finally, that Christmas storm again was a little bit lower, 8.5 feet NAVD 88. Again, high probabilities over time of that sort of water level occurring with sea level rise. So next, we sort of put those projected water surface elevations into context of the built environment. How does it affect buildings and infrastructure in the study area? So we'll kind of walk through how we did that. Very generally, we took those projected water surface elevations and compared them to known elevations on the landscape or on buildings, and figured out what was the highest probability event that would be impactful. So as we walk through 2030, 2050, and 2070, you see those water levels encroaching across that landscape, and then finally at the building under this 2070 projection at a 1% level. So that was the general method for doing those vulnerability assessments, and we used site survey over a couple of days where we're out with the RTK GPS measuring elevations using a scanning camera, and that's able to generate a point cloud, and we can kind of pick off the low point of entry that would affect buildings. So examples of those things are doorways, bulkheads, basement window wells, vents, generator pads, first floor elevations. Example, for town hall, we have actually two different critical elevations. So one, you have a bottom floor that houses the police and harbor master, I believe. That's one point of entry that would impact that building at the door. And then you have a second level that houses town offices, administrative offices, as well as other building infrastructure on that porch. So that was an example where there were two different potential impacts on the building. So comparing those projected water surface elevations to all those things we measured in the field, we developed this vulnerability assessment set of maps. As we step through time, you'll notice that the color of the buildings change in terms of increasing probability over time. And as you get into the, further into the future, flooding impacting buildings, most notably here, the wastewater treatment plant, lower levels of town hall, some of the residential areas behind Beach Street, and areas of the working waterfront, the marina, some of the low-lying residential areas at the top of the harbor are potentially impacted over time. So this was compared to the lowest point of entry on all of those buildings. And just in summary, we kind of broke up the study area buildings in terms of their use. There were 29 commercial structures that we assessed, and over time, up to 25 of those could be vulnerable to storm surge impacts. Municipal and federal government buildings, so town offices, town offices, other municipal property, and the post office, up to 6 of those 7 buildings were potentially vulnerable over time. And the utilities, again, the wastewater treatment plant was one of the concerns in terms of impacts. And then we did find, out of the 50 residential structures in the area, up to 32 of them were vulnerable into extreme storm surge. So that summarizes the vulnerability assessment, and then Alex will sort of describe what's next in terms of applying these results and planning for the future.
Yeah, thanks, Joe. So just very quickly, where are we heading next? Well, the next phase of the project is the alternatives analysis that I mentioned briefly before. In this phase, the team will use all of the information that we've gathered in these first 2 steps as part of the existing conditions and vulnerability assessment to look at potential neighborhood scale and site scale alternatives that would have the potential to reduce flood risks. These alternatives will be developed really to maximize the potential for both nature-based and hybrid design approaches, and the phasing of improvements will be proposed to match the several different future climate risk scenarios that we've been developing as part of these early phases of the project. So just to give you a sense of what this might look like for site scale alternatives, these can range from the implementation of protective barriers to the relocation of critical building systems, or things like generators, to even elevating structures. And then zooming out in scale to the more neighborhood scale alternatives, these can range from more nature-based approaches, such as developing elements of living shoreline or constructed wetlands, to hybrid approaches such as waterfront parks, or even more engineered or hardened infrastructure that you're perhaps more familiar with in the form of flood walls, bulkheads, and seawalls. So with the 1 minute left here, I'll kick it over to my colleague Chelsea just to close us out to talk about very briefly next steps in terms of our public engagement calendar as well. Chelsea?
Thank you. As Alex mentioned earlier, we are going to be having public meetings at each key phase of this planning process. We have developed the project website. It's linked here on the slide. The QR code should get you there as well. The project website is also on the town's main landing page on the left-hand side. I think it is still called Village Flood Plan, but I'm gonna be changing that over to Coastal Vulnerability Action Plan soon, but it's on the town's website. We have an email sign-up form on the project website as well to keep people engaged and up to date on the planning process. We did also establish a steering committee with the help from town staff, and we met with them last week. They are incredibly knowledgeable and engaged, and we're really looking forward to having them help guide this planning process.
Thanks, Chelsea. So with that, I'll bring our presentation to a close. Thanks for letting us run a minute over here. Just want to thank you all for your time. I left my contact information up here along with Joe's. Should you have additional questions or feedback beyond the time that we have here today, but certainly would welcome any pressing questions that you may have or thoughts or comments on what we've presented. And I can kind of maybe kick it back over to you, Greg, to help us moderate, and I can take us off share so we can have our faces back in the panel of squares here.
Well, that's a lot to take in. Betsy, I'll be with you in just a minute. I want to go around the board first. John?
Dire predictions here, given the elevation in this town. I am particularly interested in one of your earlier slides dealt with the models that you had there, and of course, the past 100 years is pretty much a plot that's first order linear with regard to sea rise, and then all of a sudden everything takes off. And I know that a big discussion is, well, what models are you going to pick? And all of your models pretty much went to second order and took off, and instead of going up about an inch every 10 years or so, it was going up 4 or 5 or 6 inches. And I'd just like to know more. Yes, this is the plot. And I'd be interested to know more about the models, because the models are driving everything here. They really are.
Yeah, Joe, do you want to handle that and maybe talk about what we even use for planning in Massachusetts, usually with these range of models?
Yeah, so as I said, the state has developed these sea level rise projections. They're the default for planning, for infrastructure planning, big projects, is conservative, understandably by nature. It's this the high scenario, not the extreme. And it's, we could really dig into the weeds about, exceedance probabilities and different climate scenarios, but it's basically higher emission scenarios and more conservative estimates of ice sheet melts. So we're pretty sure we know what's going to happen with thermal expansion. As waters get warmer, they expand. Less certain about how ice sheets and when, how they contribute to how much and when. It could be that things play out on that intermediate scenario, which is why we try and keep those numbers on there and bracket. Your 2030 could actually be your 2050 and so on. But these are the range of scenarios given global climate models, and as up to date as they are, downscaled for Massachusetts from leading experts on sea level rise. So, short answer is it's conservative for planning purposes, but kind kind of a range of
Well, our
possibilities.
planning board is here tonight, and they could probably use a couple of these slides in response to a 40A application.
Yeah. Which might
Well,
be
we'll be
offensive.
happy to share the
Okay.
deck on the website after the meeting, and you can always email us as well to get that information.
Thank you very much. Brian?
No, got nothing. Just so.
Kathy?
Just a question, so obviously what you're giving us, I mean, it's a lot of great data, so thank you for that, and the pictures are worth 1,000 words, so thank you even more for that. So we're all talking about risk here, right? And the projections are based on taking historical information and, you know, projecting it out into the future as well. How often do you recommend we monitor the sea level rise? So we had to, you know, because things have changed, right? But we haven't hit that hockey stick yet of thankfully, of significant sea level rise in a real short period yet. But how often is it recommended that we monitor the actual rise so that we can continually update our long-term capital plans?
Yeah, so that's a good question. I'll maybe clarify one thing you said is these models are based not only on known past historic events, but also on synthetic future events.
Right.
So the Massachusetts Coast Flood Risk Model uses some of MIT's modeling on hurricanes and nor'easters going into the future. It's a complicated answer about how often to measure. So mean sea level is something that is established by NOAA. If you go to the Boston tide gauge and you look at the tidal benchmarks, you can find, actually, Alex, if you pull up that chart again, the sea level rise chart. Mean sea level is, the tidal benchmark is established based on a 19-year period. So you see that first aqua box down there that says NOAA Epic 1983 to 2001. Those are the last 19 years that NOAA looked at to say what is mean sea level elevation. Before the flood risk model was developed, the most recent 19 years that were available for analysis were 1999 to 2017. So that's what informed that data that puts an X within that black box. So that's what we're calling current or our baseline for mean sea level. You won't know until you get another 19 years of data, right? Because you can keep measuring every year, and mean sea level is variable based on a variety of factors, including currents and gravitational forces and all that. The good news is that you're not too far away from an existing tide gauge. So, sort of every 5 to 10 years, you could update, an assessment of mean sea level and see, are you starting to hit that inflection point on those charts? I know that's not a solid answer, but
That's a perfect, that range is perfectly acceptable answer. Thank you.
Understanding how these things are calculated maybe helps.
Thank you.
Sure.
Anne?
I saw it last week and made my comments then, and everyone else seems to understand it fine.
Okay, Betsy Ware?
Good evening. Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes.
Okay. So I am the interim town planner in Manchester, and I also lived in the town for about 40 years. I grew up in the town. I'm a land planner, and I also own a house out on an island just outside of Manchester Harbor. So I have a great deal of interest in this issue. I have a couple of comments. Firstly, FEMA recently contacted us about some preliminary flood rate maps. And they specify elevation 12 as being a significant floodplain level. That would basically inundate a fair amount of the areas that you're looking at, as well as the MBT rail line, particularly out near Boardman Avenue, which is out of your study area. But we are getting those maps, so I wondered what kind of coordination you have with FEMA on this.
So FEMA is typically looking at historical data sets, but they take a little bit of a different approach, and sometimes also incorporate freshwater riverine discharge as well, which is in this area we're just focused on the coastal storm surge. So there's sometimes differences both in the way they model their base flood elevation and waves, as well as the signals that they're putting into those projections. So I guess the most direct answer to your question is we're not coordinating with FEMA because we're looking at future storm surge. That water level that they're telling you to plan for, did you say it was 12? And I'm assuming that's feet and ADD 88.
Yep.
Was that with a with freeboard, or does that include, or would you add another foot of freeboard onto that?
I think you'd add another foot of freeboard.
So that's their base flood elevation. Yeah, communities have been getting these revised flood maps, and depending on the unique characteristics of your town, it may make sense to take a second look at them and see if it's necessary to change for the near future. It's probably a water level that you might see in the future. It's just when and what probability level.
So I have two more comments. The other comment of note is that Masconomo Park, the MBTA station, where the wastewater treatment plant is, and the parking lot behind Town Hall, more locations, those were all filled highlands. So if you look at an 1850s picture from Spy Rock Hill of the Inner Harbor, it basically came in as far as where you're presently showing as flooding. So all of that is subject to Chapter 91. And the train line, when it first came in, was not on filled tideland. It was on a trestle that ended up going almost to Beach Street. So kind of just put that one in your thinking cap. And a final note is that because I own a house on an island and we're looking to rebuild our pier in the next, hopefully 10 years, I've looked at Beverly, Salem, Marblehead, and Gloucester's municipal vulnerability plans. And almost all of those communities are looking at 4 to 5 feet increased sea rise level at 2050. So as I understand your numbers, you're saying that it's going to be up 2.5 feet. So I was just a little curious how those numbers came out.
You might be talking about elevation versus change. You'd have to show me what you were.
Yeah, if you go to the municipal vulnerability plans for Beverly, Salem, Marblehead, and Gloucester. They
Betsy,
all-
I'm gonna jump in there. I think,
Okay.
perhaps that's not something that we need to get into pertaining to other towns and cities at this point. Maybe that's.
They should all be using the same sea level rise projections.
Yeah, that's, I think, a conversation that you might have directly with them.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Betsy.
Charles Waldheim?
Thanks. I just wanted to mention, I really appreciate the work that Alex and Joe and their team are presenting. I think it's really serious work and urgent and well done. The probabilistic modeling is really, I think complementary to the scenario-based work that we've been doing. To Betsy's question, I could just add that in our study, looking across the Cape, we found, over 1,000 households in the FEMA floodplain right now. And so whatever model we use, we can say, just stop digging and, let's not put more impervious surface in the wetlands. Let's not, continue to permit and build in places that we know are an extremity, irrespective of whatever model, happens going forward. There's some things that we can, benchmark as best practices, and looking at the households that are in FEMA floodplains right now will give you a kind of complementary exterior to the focus on the downtown and the village core.
Thank you very much. Ron Master Giacomo, Chair Planning Board.
9 Masconomo Street, just wondering if the advent of electric cars and wind would have any mitigation effects on the sea rise as we move forward into 2050. We move away from fossil fuel.
Yeah, certainly, there's a certain portion of this sea level rise that's sort of already locked in based on our past actions. As you go further out into the future and that cone of uncertainty expands based on, the known unknowns, then changing the course of action on global greenhouse gas emissions can make a difference. But it's got to be at a scale that's meaningful.
Thank you. Thank you, Ron. Did any other members of the Planning Board wish to ask any questions? Okay. Next steps. Greg?
So the team will move into assessing alternatives in terms of how to back up. We'll be looking at various alternatives for how to mitigate some of these flooding impacts. And they will be reviewing those with the steering committee and working with the steering committee, developing a tentative set of recommendations that will be then presented at a future public meeting. We'll probably hold the next public meeting separate from a select board meeting, just because it'll take up more time and require a lengthier conversation. We want to make it more interactive and hopefully give an audience of residents to give feedback. So we'll be getting that information out to folks when that meeting will be scheduled, and putting out some information in preparation for that meeting so people can come prepared.
Okay. Great. Well, thank you all very much for a lot of information you've provided us this evening. We have homework, more homework. Anything else?
Alex, you're all set?
All right, thank you
Great.
very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Yes, thank you. Okay, I think that brings us, we'll bump governance and continue on to the annual town meeting, which is what I think many people have tuned in for. Greg, do you want to tee this one up?
Sure, so two major elements tonight. The first is a review and finalization of the proposed budgets, both operating and capital for the town. So the Finance Committee has completed their review. They have made their final recommendations, and the numbers in summary form were in their packet. Many of you have been following closely the discussions with the planning board and are pretty familiar with where things stand. So, high level changes from, we started in December with a preliminary budget that staff put together. That's what both you and the finance committee have been reviewing for the past couple of months. The big changes from that preliminary budget focus on public safety staffing, both in police and fire. So in police, we have, compared to this current year's budgetary numbers, going into the next year, added dollars to add 3 officers to the roster. It's primarily due to a rapid decline in the number of reserve officers. We went from 12 officers over a couple month period down to 2 as a result of police reform. Briefly, it means that with police reform that all officers, reserve or for full-time, must have the same level of training. And so if a reserve officer has to have the same training as a full-time, that person's gonna go get a full-time job. And that's exactly what has happened to our situation. And so if we were not to hire new officers, we would see a very significant increase in our overtime budget as we maintain 2 officers on duty at any one time. And so it's more cost effective to actually hire the new officers. It has the added benefit of accomplishing a couple of other goals for us, which is provide station coverage with the shifting of dispatch services to the regional. We obviously no longer have our own dispatchers in the station, and so by having a police officer in the station, we can still provide that coverage to walk-ins, and they can provide additional services while they're in the station. It also provides the ability to do more water patrolling. Another aspect of police reform is they are phasing out the ability of harbor masters and harbor staff to have powers of arrest on the water. And so by having additional officers, we can provide some more police presence on the water, which was another goal that you had for the new year. Net was an actual lower cost compared to what we were paying for dispatching, but it used up most of those dollars that were saved from dispatching. On the fire side, the proposal is to add 2 new firefighters.
I've got a question.
Yeah.
Something before you get into the fire.
Sure.
I was just curious, so the dispatcher positions, you've got 272 down there. We kicked in with our service on March 1st, and of course, in the current year's budget, we expected that we were gonna be spending money from then until, I think, June 30th with regard to those positions.
Right.
Does that money fall to the bottom line here? That's gotta be over $100,000.
So first of all, we continue on with most of them until the end of the year as part of the transition period.
Okay, so we're paying them, but they're not here.
No, they're here. They're in the station. They're doing work. They're starting to work on some of the data
Oh, okay.
Conversions.
Okay, conversions, okay.
They're still taking in so we're not fully up and running on the new records management system.
It's records issues.
So they're putting in the incidents in our existing records system. So those folks are still working for us.
Okay.
And they're providing station coverage.
Correct.
Yes, that's correct.
So we won't be able to obviously have the officers provide that until we hire the new officers and get them up and running.
Okay.
So the other, as I say, on the fire side, adding 2 additional full-time firefighters. And again, by providing that level of staffing, eventually when we have those people on board and fully trained, that would give us 16 full-time firefighters. So that's 4 groups of 4 people. So up to 60% of the time, we would have 4 people on duty. During leave time situations, vacation, sick leave, personal days, dropping down to 3. So again, a significant reduction in overtime. And so that reduction in overtime pays for about half of the additional cost. And so there is a net increase in the fire department, a little over 100,000 for staffing. We also have put into the budget funds to pay, if we can, get new people to be part of a call force. We had lost our call personnel that had dwindled to the point where we let the last few go. But there is a desire, as you've been involved in the discussions with both FinCom and yourselves, to see if we might be able to reconstitute, at least on a preliminary, limited basis, the call forces to augment our career firefighters during those large incidents, when you need all hands on deck. Obviously, our mutual aid is still in place, which is robust. But if we can provide some additional augmentation through the call force as it used to be, at least probably not what it used to be in its heyday, but we're hoping that we can implement and reconstitute a portion of it. So there are dollars in the fire department budget for that as well. We've had a number of discussions on our land
Before we go
management
to
staffing.
that, and I know you wanted to, we're talking staffing,
Yes.
but did you want to?
No, I wanted to talk specifically. Would we ever consider using call firefighters to step in when there was an absence due to vacations or holiday or?
If that person was available and was trained to provide both fire and EMS, then yes. You know, the EMS side is the majority of the calls, and so that's that would be critical to make sure.
Okay, so. Yeah.
So not all call firefighters would probably have that level of training.
And just, I know you've answered this to me before, but would we require that all call firefighters be EMT trained?
Under this model, it's not anticipated, so that you could have someone who wants to focus on the firefighting side and only respond to firefighting calls.
Right, thank you.
So those are the 2 biggest changes in the preliminary budget in terms on the town side. The third very large change from the preliminary budget is the proposal from the school district.
Can we go back to land management staffing? Sorry.
Sure. So on the land management side, I did start to go down that and then I stopped. We've had a number of discussions about possible reconfigurations, building inspector, town planner. We have a retirement coming up in conservation agent. And so there may be some reconfigurations, but I see them, depending on the configuration, that it's dollar neutral. So we don't need to worry too much about the details of that at this moment. The budget that has been proposed is sufficient to fund a number of different configurations that we might consider. So we need to keep going on those discussions and finalizing those plans. But in terms of approving your budget tonight, we don't need to have that set in stone this evening.
Because we have some monies.
The
to
monies
look
are in
at
the
that.
budget.
Monies are there.
Yes.
Okay, so we can talk about, at our next meeting, about getting something in place now.
Yeah, we have time. We have a few months.
But I mean, for now through the end of the year,
For now,
a
the
fiscal year.
For now, at the end of this fiscal year, it's status quo in terms of staffing. There is some monies available because of the switch of the planner.
Okay, can we put this, okay, well, I'd like to get that on an agenda then for the next meeting. But for now, we've got that taken care of for next year, fiscal year 24. All right, thank you.
So in terms of operating budgets then, the biggest change of all is in the school district proposal. So they are proposing what's being called a correction year. And so in the past few years, they have been relying on reserve funds to fund their operating budget. And so as, every year you do that, you dig the hole a little deeper and have relying on those reserve funds. And at some point they run out. And so the '24 budget is proposed to no longer rely on reserve funds and instead replace those reserve funds with new taxation revenues. So a bigger request from each of the two towns. The overall school budget is a 6.9% increase overall. In terms of the request from the towns, the actual budget is a 4.3% increase. It is a little higher than what we've had targeted. The 3.5 is what we've been always aiming for. It's a little higher this year, the 4.3, as they try to reinstitute some of the cuts that were made in the last couple of years. And so that gets us to an overall increase of 6.9, but then because of the apportionment formula based on enrollment, because proportionately number of Essex students has climbed relative to Manchester students, we have a smaller increase to pay, so ours is a 5.7% increase projected, and Essex is projected at just under 9%, at 8.9%. And so that's as a result of the formula, applying that apportionment formula to each town. So as the Finance Committee reviewed all of these numbers, again, the summary sheet gives you the numbers for each category of government, general government, public safety, public works, etc. To come in with a tax rate that was close to 2.5. They didn't quite make the 2.5 because of that large school increase. But they did trim back on taxation going to capital. And they did up the amount of estimated receipts. So every year we have estimated receipts, which the biggest one is your excise tax from motor vehicles, about $1 million we take in on the excise tax on cars that people have in town, permit fees, a host of different revenues to the tune of actual monies we receive is close to $3 million. We have always been conservative in estimating those receipts. This year we estimated them at $2.5 million. And any excess receipts that we have received in the past, we have had that flow into the fund balance, and then the following year we have typically allocated those dollars to capital. The Finance Committee felt that we could up that estimated receipt to help us with some of these higher expenses in order to avoid a larger tax increase. So bottom line is with their assumptions about local receipts and scaling back monies going into capital, it would come to just under a 3% tax increase for next year, despite having basically a district budget that's almost double what we normally pay. So we're absorbing that higher school district assessment without having to do an override. We do have some excess levy capacity, so we can go higher than 2.5% without an override. Because the last few years we've been below 2.5. We had one year where we kept it at 0, the first year of the pandemic. We scaled things back, again on capital primarily, so that we could come in at a 0%. The following year we came in at 2 rather than the 2.5. So that built up some levy capacity within the limits of Proposition 2.5. not to get too much in the weeds, but some context here to understand. That's a quick overview of where we've gone from, obviously a lot of discussion, a lot of detail, but from December until now, those are the highlights of the changes. And so you have a proposed budget, a grand total of just under 41 million. It's about a 2% increase over this current year's total expenses. But some of that is masked because we've done a lot less in community preservation. So that skews some of these percentages. So it's a little confusing to follow it line by line that way. I'm happy to go into the other details in terms of the budget. But tonight, we do need your approval of what you want to present to the voters, whether you want to do anything differently than what the Finance Committee has recommended or not.
Comments, John?
Yeah, so right now, the Finance Committee has recommended the budget that we're looking at, correct?
Correct.
And that's what they will recommend in the warrant.
Correct.
Okay, and I noted your concerns about reducing capital and kind of pumping money in there. I also know that Essex is wrestling with a bigger issue than we're wrestling with.
Yeah, so they will have to have an override to.
Yes, they will. Where is your thinking on what Essex is going to do? Because this goes back to the drawing board.
Right, so it's tough to predict.
I'm not gonna hold you to it.
I think it's fair to say that it'll be a challenge for Essex to bring this across the finish line as proposed.
Okay, so I guess the point I'm making is if Essex says, no, this is too much money, and the school committee has to go back and say, okay, I gotta relook at this. Anything that Essex says they're not interested in, let's reduce it, that reduces us.
Correct.
Because we have a percentage there. So your concerns with regard to capital, if this goes back to the drawing board, is that there may become more money available because all of a sudden our, well, what, 4.3 or whatever it is, becomes 4.1? Or it becomes something less?
Correct, yes.
Okay.
Yes, now, you have an opportunity to correct at a future town meeting, if it were the case. So let's say, so the process is, each town must approve the district budget for them to have a budget. So if Manchester says yes, and Essex says no, they don't have a budget. So then they would have to hold a second town meeting. Each town would vote a second time. Could be the same budget if this district wanted to propose it, but likely it would be a lower number in order to
That was
attempt
their
to get
objective.
to a yes. And so if it were to fail a second time, then the third try is in a joint meeting of the two towns. It's one town meeting with residents from both towns attending, and it's a majority vote of who's in attendance.
Well, I don't wanna get in the weeds too much here and conjecturing what might happen. The number, I think, could only go down, it would not go up, regardless of.
It's not gonna go up.
It's not going to go up, but I strongly feel that whatever the Finance Committee wants, we should be on the same page, because we're much closer to this than the electorate. They're not gonna know all of these numbers, et cetera. They're looking for us and for the Finance Committee to say, this is what we think makes sense, so. I'm done.
Thanks, John. Brian?
I always like John going before me. I'm good.
Okay. Kathy Bellata?
I think since this is kind of a correction year for the school, I really feel that should just stand on its own. I don't know, I mean, that's between the district and the voters. I don't know why we need to comment on it. I'm happy with the rest of the budget, but the school's gotta make their own case, is my feeling.
Ann Harrison?
Yeah, I'm comfortable with the reduction in the capital, and I would like to have you speak a little bit more about that. I understand that the project that the large project that got moved off was planning for the DPW site.
Right, which, I have to, I'm okay with delaying that. We're not, because we have the facility plan coming and, I won't make Chuck and Nate happy by saying that, but I think we could pick that back up in the fall if it's ready to move forward. What concerns me is it's sort of a double hit. So we've been adding 150 to 200,000 or so from taxation to the capital plan for the almost 10 years now. So that has enabled us to get to a point where we're finally able to put some real money in the capital. If we drop back the 350 from taxation for next year, so instead of being at 1.9, we'll be at 1.55. And then next year, the plan was to be at 2.1. So that's a 556, almost 600,000 bridge to gap, to a bridge to an area to fill. So that's that's bigger than what we probably are going to do. So I think it's going to so that's one part of setting the capital back. The second part is that by upping the estimated receipts 300,000 and not putting that money into capital, we basically have diverted that money from capital as well. So in essence, we're diverting about 900,000 from capital. And that sets us back. We've made really good progress over the last 8-9 years, and I just hate to see us take that step back. I understand, why the finance committee was doing that. They're focused on making sure the tax rate doesn't go up too high in '24. In my perspective, I think we're kicking the can down the road a little bit.
What would you like to do?
So I would, it sort of goes back to what Kathy just suggested. I think the school budget should stand on its own. If the taxpayers want to increase the school budget by 5.7%.
That's a separate thing on the warrant and get
Right.
voted on separately.
Right.
But
I don't think we should try to accommodate within the realm of 2.5, because normally that kind of correction is an override. And even though we have the capacity, the levy capacity, I still think it should increase the tax rate if we're going to increase that much money to the school district. I think if the taxpayers want to fund the schools, that's fine. They should dip into their pockets to do so.
I have a question, just mechanics. I'm sorry.
Ann, are you?
I'm not quite done, but I'd be willing to yield the floor.
I just have a clarification question. So, the money you're talking about, the 300, 350, whatever it is, it's kind of like we've been saving money in the piggy bank, right, for our capital?
Right.
Right?
Right.
And
it grew to
right.
a higher than targeted level.
My question is, we have a philosophical difference here between what the finance committee is proposing and what you would like to do. And my question is, from a logistics standpoint, is there a way to craft an article to let the voters decide on that philosophical issue? Is there a way to craft an article that says, hey, we'd like to put more money in the piggy bank. We're spending less, we're planning to spend less in this area to make sure we don't tax you too much this year. However, we're not gonna put as much in the piggy bank as we normally do. Is there a way to structure an article to give the voters a chance to say, you know what, I'm okay with putting a little more in the piggy bank this year? Is there a way to do that?
So I guess I wouldn't frame it so much as putting it into the piggy bank.
Well, I'm just trying to use language
No,
that's,
I
that I
understand.
understand.
So I'm on board with the finance committee's desire to not have such a large fund balance.
Right.
I understand that.
Reserve, yes.
You know, it's, you're sitting on taxpayers' monies when you don't have to.
Correct.
I'm okay with that. I understand that concern and that makes sense to me. But so my correction to that would be to spend those dollars for capital now.
I'm sorry, for what?
To spend those dollars on capital now.
Yeah, yeah.
So instead of taking money out of capital and allowing us to fund the school,
Right.
I think we should fund our capital. And the school should be a separate question. And if, so, and increase local receipts, that's fine.
Yeah.
But again, I would put those extra dollars into capital.
So I guess though my question was though, if we didn't have something specific like the DPW design, right?
Right.
Is there a way to frame the article? Because that's what's different, right? We cut, during the conversation, we cut the DPW design for very good reason.
Right.
It's not ready and we don't have the facilities master plan. And who made the decision that the DPW site is the next most important critical infrastructure? Maybe
it's-
that's a discussion, right? So that's why that,
Right, so
that money
instead,
was cut.
so instead of cutting the cap, take that out, that's
Yeah, yeah.
fine. But keep the taxation amount for capital where it was and lower your use of the fund balance. That'll keep it in the piggy bank for another year. But it'll be there for future capital.
So for example, if we decided to pay for drainage and sidewalk, which is 250,000 out of taxation,
Instead of fund balance,
and
yes.
maybe 200 of the road resurfacing from taxation.
Right, and you can have this debate on town meeting floor. That's where you would have, that's the
Okay,
specific area.
that's why I was asking a little logistics of, because really this is a philosophical difference. And we want the voters to decide, and the question is logistically, what's the easiest way to bring that
The
discussion?
easiest way
Okay.
is to change the funding sources in Article 5.
Okay,
Yes.
so that would be
I
the
agree with
discussion
you.
to have at, got it, thank you.
Sarah Melish has her hand up. Sarah?
Yes. So the finance committee position is that instead of taxing people for future expenses, we should be using the existing reserves. In the next year, we're going to re-examine the reserves to determine whether it should be 10% of the town operating budget or the combination of the town and the school, because the school also has 10% reserves. So next year, that will provide us with additional resources if we make that change for capital items. And we feel strongly that we should not be squirreling away money for future reasons and taxing people currently. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Alan, did you have any perspective on this? And good evening, Alan.
Good evening, Bessie, and members of the board. I don't have any position on the substantive issue here. I don't think that's my role. We could certainly, I think Greg and I could certainly come up with a set of articles that would pose the choice you're talking about to the voters.
Okay, thank you.
I think the choice that you're discussing, asking to make, is between continuing to fund or not deplete the capital reserves versus increasing the tax rate sufficiently to cover the increase in the school budget, which, depending on what the numbers work out to be, might mean an override.
Okay, thank you, Alan.
And I just would add, I think that's a choice the voters are perfectly capable of making.
Okay, thank you. Did you see, there's a message from Chuck?
I was just reading it.
Okay. Did you want to?
Share it with us?
But, yeah, so
Yeah.
and Chuck's on, he can make the comment himself, but he writes that, and it's true, in DPW, there's a couple of things at play. The cost of construction has risen significantly. We've seen about a 20% rise in construction costs in this last year or two. Secondly, that he's not able to proceed with projects until he knows he has the money. And so it does take, sometimes it takes a couple of years to spend that money. So it's nice to have the money, to know that you have it, so that you can get your bids and then go forward. So before you can do all of that, you need to have the money in hand.
So
So,
an alternative would be to put back the 350,000 and make it from taxation?
I'm sorry.
If we put back the DPW facility design and with funding source of taxation,
Right.
would that solve your problem of continuing to increase the available funds for capital?
It does from the taxation point of view, yes. So I made that caveat because we're shifting some of the local receipts away from capital as well. So if I get half of it back, I'm happier.
The question though, if we put that money back, then that money would have to be spent on DPW design.
If you put it for that particular use, yes.
And I think that's what the concern was. That's an awful lot of money when the strategy of what's most important from an infrastructure standpoint is still unclear.
But yes, I mean, there are other
infrastructure's
studies that have
one, yeah.
indicated that it was gonna come out that way, but in terms of the new plan, you're right, it hasn't been determined through that process.
However, the longer we do kick that can down the road, the more compromised, it gets more expensive, but also the equipment we have is left out to the elements. So it's more of a cost than just a facility study. We have other factors to consider that. Sarah?
Yeah, so the position of the FinCom was that we have not yet determined an appropriate site for the DPW. Therefore, spending $350,000 on design is premature and is not appropriate to include in the budget. And we should wait until the facilities report is done to determine where the DPW will be located to do an appropriate design. We just don't believe we should be squirreling away money for future what-ifs. And that we need to tax people based on the as-ifs. Thank you.
But I started out by saying I was okay with deferring that, that project for now.
Okay.
Can I just say too, this is Chuck, I just wanna say, like, I'm not on here right now fighting for a DPW facility. I'm more in line with Greg's line of thinking, which is to remove that money from the capital, I think does set us back, whether it's a DPW facility or anything else. And so my point is only that it doesn't have, even if you vote on it as DPW facility now, doesn't necessarily mean that I get to spend it now on a DPW facility now or in the future. And that was my only point. So that's all.
Thank you, Chuck. I did have a question regarding the turf field at Brook Street.
Yes.
Wasn't there a change to that, or was there? I thought there was some.
So the school originally was going to pay for their share out of their reserve, out of their reserves. They feel like they are facing potential significant needs at the Essex Elementary School, and their reserves, they don't want to spend down their reserves on the, and not have those available for emergencies. So they would prefer to do a small bond for the fields. But regardless of that, we share the cost of Brook Street. So it's a 50-50 split on the Brook Street field. So the 400,000 that's in the capital budget for Brook Street is our share, and the school will pay 400,000 as well to complete Brook Street. The school district will pay 100% of the Highland field, the turf field there.
Okay. I asked just because of when we first entered into that contract with the school. It was to be a shared expense, so I just wanted to make sure that was still going there. Then the other question is regarding the COA van replacements. Where does, the vans are, and it's a small amount, I don't want to spend a lot, no, relatively small, 25,000 is not chump change, but what happens to the vans that they replace?
They usually get traded in.
And where does that money go?
So it offsets the cost of the new van.
Okay, so it doesn't go into a kitty somewhere?
No.
In COA, okay, thank you. John?
As long as we're talking about small monies, the police tasers there, that was a big topic of discussion last year. I thought that got settled. Didn't we decide we were gonna get them and they need more?
So they broke it down into two phases, two or three.
Two phases or two phasers?
Two phases of tasers.
Tasers.
I must enunciate clearly. I know, it was multiple years, I just not remembering if it was.
Is that what happened?
Two or three.
3
Tasers, yeah.
Sarah, I'll come back to you.
Was everybody had their own personal taser?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
So they don't right now, but they will if this gets voted in.
Except for 2 guys.
Yeah, well, I don't, yeah, you're right.
Yeah. It looks like 3 years.
Oh.
We did the current year, we're doing it 24, and then we have a final one in 25.
When we onboard more.
You know what, I think it's at least, I'm gonna have to I'm gonna have to check with Chief on that. I think it might be a lease to buy program for everybody. And that's why it was
You can lease
stretched
a
out,
taser?
I think it was stretched out over 4 years. I'm sorry, I'm gonna have to double check on that.
All right.
And did you want to, you were talking about fire equipment? You wanted to talk about that?
I think it's a separate item on the agenda.
Not the engine replacement fund?
Not the engine
Okay.
replacement.
Okay.
I don't know why the engine replacement fund was cut, but apparently the finance committee thinks that it should be.
Okay, Sarah Melish?
Yes, I just wanted to respond to what Chuck Dam said. And I think that the position of the finance committee is when capital projects arise, we want to fund them at the point in which they need to arise. We don't want to pre-fund items that may or may not occur. We want it to be transparent to the taxpayers, that they understand what they're paying for, and if it requires a tax increase, so be it.
Okay, I think he was in agreement with you, actually.
Oh, I don't know.
Okay, all right. Any more questions on the operating and capital budgets?
No question?
I'm sorry?
I gather that there is no appetite for trying to continue to build the capital budget.
That's not what I'm hearing.
Then I move that we approve the operating capital budgets as presented by the finance committee.
Second.
Okay, moved by Ann Harrison, seconded by Kathy Bellata. Roll call vote. John Round,
Yes?
Ryan Solacey,
Yes.
Kathy Bellata,
Yes.
Ann Round. I did it again.
Whoa, whoa,
Ann
something
Harrison. Okay. I'm
Yes.
just gonna have you two, anyway.
Right, we're
Moving right
We're
along.
gonna move around and see
Before
how
it
you
was
handle
John
that.
Harrison, which was your dad's name. Moving along, Ann Harrison
Yes.
and Becky Jakes votes yes. Okay, it's unanimous.
So I just, Todd did text me, he was listening in.
Yes.
So it is a lease to own over a 5-year period.
At least a taser, all right.
Wow. Okay, next up, we have the warrant for the annual town meeting. Okay. Reg,
So there are a few decisions to make on the warrant. And probably easiest just to walk through them one at a time. So Article 1 is a standard article to accept the various reports in the annual report.
Move to approve Article 1. Move to support the approval of the, whatever we're supposed to do.
You recommend approval.
Move to recommend approval of Article 1.
Second.
roll call, okay, moved by Ann Harrison, seconded by John Round. Roll call vote, Ann Harrison,
Yes.
John Round,
Yes.
Kathy Bellata,
Yes.
Ryan Solacey.
Yes.
Becky Jake says yes too, thank you. Okay,
Article 2, again, standard article to say we're not paying you for all the time and energy you put in as select board as well as other elected officials. So we don't pay elected officials.
no, we do not. Have a motion?
Move to recommend approval of Article 2.
Second.
Okay, moved by Ann Harrison, seconded by Kathy Bellata. Roll call vote. Ann Harrison?
Yes.
Kathy Bellata?
Yes.
Brian Solacey?
Yes.
John Round?
Yes.
And Becky
You'd have
Jake
to
says
recuse
yes.
yourself.
Okay, Article 3.
Article 3 is the appropriation for the Essex North Shore Agricultural and Technical School District. We participate in the district. We're anticipating sending 14 students there next year. And this is the estimated budget.
Move to approve.
Second.
Okay, moved by John Round, seconded by Brian Solacey. The roll call vote, Ann Harrison,
Yes.
Kathy Bellata,
Yes.
Brian Solacey,
Yes.
John Round.
Yes.
And Becky Jake says yes. Okay.
Then Article 4 is the town operating budget, which you just voted on. So that it'll be that, so that, just the town operating, it's around $15 million in the figures. So that's what Article 4 is.
Move to recommend approval of Article 4.
Second.
Okay, moved by Ann Harrison, seconded by John Round. Roll call vote, John Round,
Yes.
Ryan Solacey,
Yes.
Kathy Bellata,
Yes.
Ann Harrison,
Yes.
and Becky Jake says yes.
So Article 5 is the annual capital budget for the town. Again, you approved these numbers in your previous vote of the budget. If you wanted to debate a fund balance versus taxation, you could do that here.
Okay,
Would we have to check, can the funding source be changed after tonight?
Yes, it can be changed from the floor at town meeting.
Okay.
So the warrant would go in as shown here, which is consistent with the Finance Committee recommendation. And if you wanted to, if you or someone else wanted to make an amendment on the floor to have a debate about taxation versus fund balance, on a couple of these items, you could.
I think that's the best way of.
Easiest way of
putting
having the discussion
that
and
discussion.
letting the voters decide.
Right.
Move that we recommend approval of Article 5 as presented.
Second.
Okay, moved by Ann Harrison, seconded by Kathy Bellata. Roll call vote. Ann Harrison?
Yes.
Kathy Bellata?
Yes.
Brian Solacey?
Yes.
John Round?
Yes.
And Becky Jakes says yes. Okay, Article 6.
Article 6 is the regional school district budget. So both their operating and their debt service. So the debt service is coming down, but the operating is up. So again, that was part of your overall approval of the recommendation from the Finance Committee, but obviously you can.
Clarification there, I thought it was the town operating budgets that we just approved.
Could you speak up for the?
I'm sorry, I thought it was the town operating budgets that we.
You're right, it was. We
So
talked-
how would this
We talked
be
about it, but
phrased?
you didn't vote on the school per se.
Right.
How would this be, I know sometimes in the warrant, it says, select board recommends approval. Is that
Right.
what we're voting on?
That's
right now?
what you've been doing so far, yes.
Because it's gonna appear on the warrant.
Mhm.
So there's two things, we're voting to agree to present this information
Mhm.
and then agree to approve it? Or
Recommend
recommend
it.
approval?
Right. Right. I mean, often you have done that in two separate, you approve the articles and then you go through the recommendations. It's, most of the time, it's one and the same, but there may be some of these that aren't. So. Alan has his hand up.
Oh. Alan?
Yeah, thank you, Becky. Just one further clarification. There'll be three parts to the school committee appropriation, the two that Greg mentioned, plus we are required under state law to reapprove every year the allocation of expenses provided for by the regional school agreement. So there'll be three motions on behalf of the school committee.
Thank you, Alan. John, comments?
I'm fine with the school budget as it is. We pushed this around a little bit. It may change because there are a lot of contingencies here with our partner Essex. We just don't know where that's going.
Mhm.
But as it stands, I'm okay.
Ryan?
Yeah, no, I look at the district as like the Vatican. They're inside of big business. They operate on their own, so yeah, I've got no problem with that.
Kathy?
I'd like to take a separate vote on the recommendation of the actual budget versus the presenting to the warrant, presenting of the warrant to the taxpayers.
Ann?
So, yeah. I think what we should do then is, present our position on town meeting floor.
Okay. So we will.
I don't see how you can, it's on the, I
Yeah,
suppose
tell
we
me
could-
what the logistics are.
we're not gonna take this off the warrant.
Right, exactly, right.
You don't want us to, recommend approval.
A little high for me, yeah.
What's gonna change between now and town meeting?
Nothing.
Okay.
They might come back with a slightly lower number. They're hoping to, but it's not gonna be.
significantly
too
lower.
significant lower, yeah. Hey, it could be a couple $100,000 lower.
But you do understand?
Yeah.
That if we don't vote what they give us, then we have voted the budget down.
I understand that I felt that because I'm in disagreement with the budget, I think it's a little too high for, and I went to, a number of meetings, I feel, I'm not just making that comment off cuff here. I really feel like it's a decision between the school committee and the voters, and they're asking for a significant higher budget than I am personally comfortable with. I don't feel like interfering or
Okay, I guess
with that decision.
We could
Yeah.
take no position.
Is that an option?
Mm-hmm.
Because I just feel, especially, it's a philosophical thing again, for me personally. I don't know why we need to take a position, but,
It's just offering guidance
Yeah.
from the select board. But I understand what you're saying.
I'd be comfortable with that.
I just have a concern that the voters, if they see one signal from the finance committee, well, actually, I guess this is the school committee.
Well, but
Who's gonna recommend this?
The finance committee, they both do.
Oh, they both do. So there are recommendations that are coming from finance, from school, and from
Typically, it's been all
the
three,
select board.
yes.
Okay. I just feel when there are conflicting signals,
it makes the voters think,
yes, it does.
and I'm okay with that.
And I would agree with,
I
agree with that.
I
Makes them
move that the select board recommend approval of Article 6 as presented.
I'll second that.
Moved by Ann Harrison, seconded by John Round. Roll call vote. John Round,
Yes.
Ryan Solacey,
Yes.
Kathy Bellata,
No.
Ann Harrison,
Yes.
and Becky Jake says no, 3-2. So it will be per petition of the select board. Okay.
Not only per petition, but
Recommended.
position.
Recommended, thank you.
Yeah.
Yes, not per petition, but recommended. Thank you. Okay, next
So
article.
Article 7 is the request from the district for a bonding authority to pay for the renovation of the turf fields, the two fields. So this would not impact the FY24 budget. The first bond payment would be due in FY25.
I'm a little confused. Why is it on 24 if it's not?
So they reauthorize it, they can
okay.
borrow
Yep.
the money next
Timing.
year, but the first payment then isn't due until
Right,
25 rolls around.
okay. Any discussion?
How much money is this?
1.2,
That's for both fields?
yeah, so it's 800 for,
Our portion of Brook
Yeah, one is
Street,
split.
right,
and then, okay,
right, so each field is 800,000.
okay.
And so they pay 100% of the Highland and we pay half of Brooks.
So we're paying.
A lot of money.
Well, isn't 400 is for for Brook Street?
Or half of Brook Street.
And for Highland, if they're each 800,000, but they're paying all of the 800, we're just approving they're getting them.
Bond.
Okay, thank you. All right,
Any other?
Brook Street is gonna be older than high school.
may I have a motion?
Couple years
I move that we recommend approval of Article 7 as presented.
Second.
Moved by Ann Harrison and seconded by a nanosecond by Kathy Bellata. Roll call vote. Ann Harrison,
Yes.
Kathy Bellata,
Yes.
Ryan Solacey,
Yes.
John Round,
Yes.
and Becky Jake says yes. Okay, Article 8.
Article 8 is the community preservation article. There are 11 projects plus administrative expenses. You've reviewed and voted to approve the list. So I assume you would vote to recommend.
So moved.
Second.
Article 8.
Okay, moved by John Round, seconded by Brian Solacey. Roll call vote. John Round?
Yes.
Brian Solacey?
Yes.
Kathy Bellata?
Yes.
Ann Harrison?
Yes.
And Becky Jakes says yes. Article 9?
Article 9 is the annual appropriation to our OPEB trust account. The OPEB is other post-employment benefits. It's basically retiree health insurance. So we set aside monies as we chip away at the liability that we will owe for retirees for the health insurance, and we're on track to be fully funded in about 10 more years.
Woohoo! Any
Move
questions?
move to recommend approval of Article 9 as presented.
Second.
Moved by Ann Harrison, seconded by John Round. Roll call vote. John Round?
Yes.
Brian Solacey?
Yes.
Kathy Bellata?
Yes.
Ann Harrison?
Yes.
And Becky Jakes says yes. Article 10.
Article 10 is a proposal to add a new revolving fund. This would be for the Board of Health to use a revolving fund to pay for vaccination, flu clinics, COVID clinics if we continue a new pandemic, God forbid. But so revolving fund means you can collect monies and then you use those same monies to pay for the services that are being rendered. So instead of having to guess each year how much money to appropriate for clinics, it can be on a revolving fund where the incoming fees pay for the service.
And that will be, that'll all go through you for
Questions or
signing
discussion?
off of,
It's a combination of the health director, the board of health, and yes, the normal procedures of sign off with me and the town accountant.
okay, wonderful. Any questions?
I have never understood how these things work. They provide the vaccinations for which they have to pay, and then they pay for them with the receipts. So they're getting the receipts after they have to buy the supplies.
Right, so we are front loading it for next year.
That makes it easier.
Yes. Yeah. So there's still, for the 24 budget, we are showing the normal appropriation. But then that'll start it rolling.
In future years, we won't be paying that.
Correct.
Okay. In that case, is there more discussion? We can discuss after we move.
Okay.
Move to recommend Article 10, move to recommend approval of Article 10 as presented.
Second.
Okay, moved by Ann Harrison, seconded by Brian Solacey. Roll call vote. Ann Harrison?
Yes.
Kathy Bellata?
Yes.
Brian Solacey?
Yes.
John Round?
Yes.
And Becky Jakes says yes.
Okay, Article 11 is our other revolving fund. Every year, we need to approve the cap of how much money can come in and out. So we generally increase the cap a little bit each year, a little bit, 20, 25,000 a year. So this is the revolving fund that the Park and Recs Department utilizes for all their programs. And the cap is proposed to be at $375,000.
What is it? Is that, what was it last year?
About $350,000.
Okay. And what is the increase for, out of curiosity? No.
So sometimes the fees do increase, the volume increase potentially for programming. So this, like all the summer program, registration fees, the different athletic programs they run, et cetera.
Thank you.
So what happens if they make more than 375?
Well, technically, we would need to get authorization to go higher. So we would make an adjustment at a town meeting. So we think this gives us enough of a cushion. We've never had that problem.
How did they happen to have extra money to put in for funding of the turf field?
So they do charge an administrative fee for some of the programs, and that has accumulated over the years. So it's a cost plus for some of the charges. to cover some of the administrative costs, but then we don't back charge it. The town has covered that.
Any other questions or comments? Have a motion, please?
Move to approve move to recommend approval of Article 11 as presented.
Second.
Moved by Ann Harrison, seconded by Kathy Bellata. Roll call vote. John Round,
Yes.
Brian Solacey,
Yes.
Kathy Bellata,
Yes.
Ann Harrison,
Yes.
and Becky Jake says yes. Okay,
Ar-
Article 12.
Yeah, Article 12, this is a request to allow us to be closed on Saturdays for, and this is particularly in terms of voter registration. So state law says you have to be open so many days prior to an election.
This is okay. I'm
This is Article
obviously
12,
looking at the wrong thing,
right?
'cause I'm seeing that as 14.
Oh,
It was revised.
I'm sorry,
Is that right?
because we dropped the fire back pay because it's a salary that doesn't need special approval.
Oh, okay.
So that is no longer on the,
That's no longer on the
The
warrant.
Okay.
original 12 and 13 are gone.
okay. So now Article 14 is the new Article 12. Okay.
Excuse me, Becky,
Yes, Alan? Oh, I'm sorry.
both Article 12 and 13 on the draft I have are now gone.
Say that again,
Yes.
please.
I have Article 12 is a transfer of $95,000, and Article 13 is an article to transfer available funds to pay back wages from a previous fiscal year. Those are both gone?
Yes, correct.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Sarah Melish?
I think that the 1300, the Article 13 needs to survive.
So town council advised that wages from past fiscal years do not require a new vote if you have funds available to pay those wages. So it's a $1,300 bill, and we have those funds in this year's budget to pay.
Okay, that's not what we were told this week.
Correct. That's new information that I got over the weekend.
Thank you.
Yeah, if it was a vendor bill from a previous fiscal year, you have to have a special article to get voters to approve that. That provision doesn't apply for wages, it just applies to accounts payable on vendor bills. That was the nuance that I learned.
We all learned something.
We all learned something indeed, yes.
Okay.
So that brings us to a new number, Article 12, which is to allow us to be closed on Saturdays, even if that Saturday falls on a date that normally would be required for registering voters. So the last 3 years, we've been open on Saturdays, and we have had nobody come in to register to vote. People register to vote ahead of time. So this would allow the option of closing if we felt that there wasn't a need.
Any discussion? Have a motion, please?
Move to recommend approval of Article 12 as described.
Second.
Moved by Ann Harrison, seconded by Kathy Bellata. Roll call vote. Ann Harrison?
Yes.
Kathy Bellata?
Yes.
John Round?
Yes.
Brian Solacey?
Yes.
Okay, Becky Jake says yes too. Article 13.
Article 13 proposes to rescind a formerly adopted Mass General Law placing parking fines at $25 and adopting a new section. We go from 28 to 28 and a half, which allows the parking fines to be set at $50 rather than 25.
Remind me to move my car.
Yeah, my hand.
Any questions or comments?
there's some additional language in that 28.5, but that's the main provision.
May I have a motion?
I move that we recommend approval of Article 13 concerning parking fines.
Second.
Moved by Ann Harrison, seconded by Kathy Bellata. Roll call vote. Ann Harrison?
Yes.
Kathy Bellata?
Yes.
Brian Solacey?
Yes.
John Round?
Yes.
And Becky Jake says yes. Okay. Article 14.
So we have two articles, Article 14 and 15. There are articles related to sprinklers in buildings. So the Chief Clary has requested that this is something that the town adopt. So in Article 14, this is established the requirement for sprinkler systems in existing lodging and boarding houses. And with 6 or more unrelated persons in that lodging or boarding house. And so it would give the owners of an existing establishment 5 years to comply. So my understanding is we have one boarding house. It's on
Actually,
Jersey.
two.
Yes, 10 Old Wenham Way as well as.
Jersey Lane.
Right, but 10 Old is already sprinkled, I believe.
No, it's not.
It doesn't have a compliant sprinkler, it has a sprinkler system.
Not the sober home, it does not have, it has a full fire alarm system.
Okay.
But since it was classified as a single-family residence, it was not required, it was not an R3 required to have a sprinkler system. As a sober home under 26H,
It would qualify.
it is required to have a
With 6 or more.
sprinkler system.
Okay, all right, so we have those two. There's one at Landmark School. Okay.
What about, I thought there was one at Jersey Lane boarding house.
I don't think that's operating anymore.
Might be, I think it's Highland Ave, the Highland Ave building.
Summer Street, Summer Street.
Okay,
But we have to reevaluate the various properties
okay.
to see which were in compliance and which would not be.
What is the cost of that typically run, out of curiosity?
It depends on whether you wanna hide all the sprinklers or what the construction is with respect to what would be visible. Similar like if you were building this room and you're doing the electrical, when the studs and the walls are wide open, you run it, you put your wallboard up, you don't see it. For this room, everywhere you've got the wire mold that you couldn't go into the walls, that's kind of what happens to the sprinklers. You would see it running the perimeters if they couldn't get into the wall or up in the ceiling.
Do you have any idea? I mean, ballpark, just,
It honestly depends on the size of the residence, how many sprinkler heads, what the water pressure is coming in, does it need a reserve tank,
okay,
does it need a
say
fire
Old
pump?
Wenham Way. I mean, are we?
Well, that's gonna have to be on the outside, cause it's all concrete construction, so that would all be visible sprinkler pipes. That would have to be designed by a fire protection engineer. I don't know what the going price is, because it depends on the pipe, the number of heads, the type of heads, if a fire pump's required, so there's not a one-size-fits-all.
So it's not unsubstantial. I mean,
Right.
You're
No,
talking,
it's,
you're talking.
I think it's tens of thousands.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
you're talking
expensive.
Tens of thousands.
Yeah, tens of thousands.
And what is the state? What do most other towns in the state do?
It depends, we're one of most of the ones that I talked to have adopted 26H and I a long time ago.
How about the ones on Cape Ann?
That I don't know. I would have to go back and look at that.
Any questions, anybody else?
Yeah, I have some concerns. I have to put this together with the following article going forward. And I feel there's a little bit of regulatory overreach. There are only a couple of buildings now that might be affected. But the planning board is busy trying to change some zoning to build these kinds of houses. And you're just piling more costs onto a developer that we're trying to say, hey, can you build a half a dozen houses that somebody might be able to live in here? And I don't think, this certainly is not working in the benefit of those programs. This is all about risk benefit sort of thing we have to look at. I don't know. I mean, there are certainly various fire detection and prevention systems that are in there already. But I'm concerned that this will discourage what the planning board is trying to do.
Can I speak to that?
Let me ask the rest of the board first.
Go ahead. Have the
Brian?
question.
Well, I'm conflicted. I don't want to, it's existing buildings, although there's only a couple. There's expenses over a course of, that they never anticipated. And since we can't speak to what these actual costs are, it's very difficult to insert ourselves and require them to spend money they might not have, okay? New construction, that's a different bit of an animal here. I mean, it's a lot less expensive rather than retrofit. And I would assume that any multifamily dwellings at this point, their costs are already built into their, they've already determined the cost as far as sprinkling goes. It just makes, I mean, if I had an opportunity to move into a house that's, an apartment that's sprinkled versus it isn't, so I'm not really concerned with that. I'm mostly concerned with the retrofitting of the existing.
Yeah. Kathy?
Yeah, I'm with Brian. I think since we're not sure about the cost and something you just mentioned, Chief, about the potential retrofit to having us pipes outside of a building, holy cow.
No, outside the wall. I
Outside the
meant like-
wall,
yes.
exposed.
They'd be
okay.
exposed.
So, but still, on an outside wall, I mean, I just think there's so many unknowns there. I'm very uncomfortable with that. The new construction, I fully support. I can't imagine building, well, actually, I can't imagine building most of these things in Manchester by the Sea. But, you know, if we do build more townhouses or condominiums, I think a sprinkler system in a multifamily is just very appropriate. So I'm very comfortable with the
I want to go
Article
back to
15.
the apartment building down on Summer Street there. Okay, what I used to call it, I'm not gonna mention now, but there were a number of units, this would fall into that.
More than likely, we'd have to go in and
And I don't know if she's got the money to retrofit that building. And it's an old building as it is, so I'm uncomfortable with that.
Ann Harrison?
I've run out of opinions.
Since when?
Okay. And I am in agreement with Brian and Kathy. Article 14, I just don't know enough. And Article 15, I think going forward I think it's a very appropriate article. Chief,
yeah, well.
go ahead.
First of all, I'm a little surprised that it showed up here on this warrant, because I know that I've not really had a discussion with any of you about it. The last person I had a discussion with was Sue Brown on the planning board side.
We've discussed this
So,
before.
well, just briefly, but I haven't made a presentation. I don't have any paperwork in front of me. I can't give you any statistics. And if it's going to be controversial, I would rather be able to educate people, and rather than have people panic and think everybody in town now has to put a sprinkler system in and the whole thing crash and burn. So if it would be better to do an informational campaign at some point so we get better buy-in and better explanation, I have no problem. I have packets of material that I had hoped to present at some point prior to getting to the point to a vote, because when it's previously been brought up, it was brought up as being a controversial topic at town meeting. What I will say is, with respect to the conjugate living facilities, the rooming and boarding houses and sober homes, those tend to have a very high-risk, dangerous population, because it's not a family, it's not people that know one another, it's not people that take care of one another, and I know we're getting more staffed relative to a boarding house fire. We're horribly understaffed. And the whole idea of the sprinkler is not to save the building.
Exception to horribly understaffed.
Well, I meant with
Take
respect
exception to that.
to a boarding house fire is what I'm referring to, because that requires a lot of rescues, more people than we have. However, the whole idea of the sprinkler system is to provide the residents enough time
To
get out.
Right.
It's not about property conservation, and it will keep a fire in check till we get there, so it makes small fires stay small till we can get there and extinguish them.
Right.
But they're an extremely high-risk population. I know that part of the controversy with 10 Old Wenham Way was what the building was classified for. So had it been classified one way, it already would have been required outside of this.
Right.
So the goal are, where those are high-risk populations and there's only a couple of buildings where it would apply, it's a good bang for the buck, even though it may not be aesthetically pleasing or whatever, it's about life safety. On the other side, with new construction in multifamilies, the same thing. You have 3 or more families that don't know each other, that what happens in one apartment's gonna affect you if you're above them and on the 3rd floor. And the cost for sprinklers in new construction is far less
Yeah.
than retrofitting. And
Agree to that.
if you think of how many people would be willing to spend money to put sprinkler systems in their front yard to keep their lawn green, we're talking a similar cost to protect your family and your neighbors within the construction of a home.
Chief, we agree with that. What we're uncomfortable with is Article 14 and retrofitting. Greg, did you have comments on that? As to, I mean,
Would it,
You already said it, I don't have anything to add.
okay.
would it be possible just to, since we dropped 12 and 13, could we also drop former 16, now 14?
Yeah,
Just not put it on the warrant?
That's what you're doing tonight, deciding what
Okay.
you want to put on.
Okay.
You could,
Then I move that we drop the Article 14, which is requiring sprinklers in existing lodging and boarding houses.
Second.
Okay, moved by Ann Harrison, seconded by Kathy Bellata. Roll call vote. John Harrison? John, God bless it. Oh my gosh.
And you don't have any opinions, do you?
We're just I'm gonna start mixing up names to see who of us is, anyway.
Would you
John
like to reply, or am I supposed
Round.
to?
John Round.
Yes, that was to drop that, correct? Yes.
Brian Solacey.
Yes.
Kathy Bellata. Ann Harrison.
Yes.
And Becky Jake says yes. Okay, may I have a motion,
On the second one,
which is now number
which is now number
14?
14.
Deb, you have all this?
I have a question to the chief.
Yes.
Would you be happier if we defer this to the fall town meeting, given that you haven't had a chance to do the education that you think is important? Or do you think you can do it between now and town meeting?
Between now and town meeting, I don't know that I'll have the right platform to do something like that.
Would you be happier if we deferred it?
I might, where you folks had identified this as being controversial in the past, I would defer to what your thought would be as to what type of discussion, how it would be received at town meeting without education and a debate on the town meeting floor versus an educational campaign.
I mean, I'd like to know what the state regs are right now for builders in residential. I don't know what it is. Is the cutoff 12? I mean, this is 6 here, but
I don't see any controversy, I don't see it being controversial in new construction.
Kathy?
Yeah, I don't understand what the controversy would be, given the phrasing here, because we're only talking about new construction that contains 4 or more dwelling units.
We're still not talking a lot.
I don't,
At this point, we're not talking a lot. I don't think there's anything on the horizon that's, Ron, I don't know if there's anything that's 4 units or more planned.
We don't allow it.
right, so I think it's highly uncontroversial.
Okay,
if
that's
it's
fine.
new,
I think
but
so too.
I mean, it
Might have
sets the
just been
stage
to
for
put
later
together.
on.
Mhm.
It's certainly, you know,
I think it's worth a try, and if we
Sure,
can get it
okay.
through.
And? No opinion.
she's out of opinions again.
No ideas. That's awesome. Okay, may I have a motion?
I move that we vote to recommend approval of the new Article 14 concerning sprinklers in new construction, certain new construction.
Second.
Or substantially renovated.
I get that.
Mhm.
Okay, moved by Ann Harrison, seconded by Kathy Bellata. Roll call vote, Ann Harrison,
Yes.
Kathy Bellata,
Yes.
Brian Solacey,
Yes.
John Round,
No,
and Becky Jake says yes. Okay.
Fraternity house.
Article
Have a public
14.
fraternity houses here.
yeah.
Okay, so now Article.
Article 15. To see if the town will vote to grant the select board authority to research, develop, and participate in a contract or contracts to aggregate the electricity load. That was interesting, actually, of the residents and businesses in the town and other related services. Like what? Other related services?
Oh, different types of electricity, so different sources of electricity.
Okay.
You can have different levels of green in your portfolio. So this is aggregating the purchase of electricity townwide. It's an
Yeah.
opt, people have the option of opting out. They don't have to participate. Typically, when towns do this, there's a small savings, you know, penny or two on kilowatt hour.
That's what they do in Gloucester.
Gloucester has it, a lot of,
Yeah.
a lot
A
of
lot of
communities
towns
have it.
have this.
Yeah.
A lot of communities have gone forward with this.
Yep.
So it's something that people have, well, particularly when electricity was projected to go up significantly this fall. I got a number of calls saying, is the town offering this? And so it has to start with the town meeting though.
Still up there.
One of those calls was from me.
Yep.
Okay,
Let's have our own municipal light plant.
say it again.
We should have our own municipal light plant.
We should.
Yes,
Okay. Any questions?
I have a motion to accept article,
Recommend
number is it?
approval?
yes. Motion to
15.
approve was Article 15?
This has now become 15.
Yeah,
You're moving to recommend approval.
correct.
Second.
Okay, moved by John Round, seconded by Kathy Bellata. Roll call vote. John Round,
Yes,
Brian Solacey,
Yes.
Kathy Bellata,
Yes.
Ann Harrison,
Yes.
and Becky Jake says yes. Okay, on to Article 6.
Yeah, the new 16, this is to allow for betterments for water system improvements that are currently private. So if you're on a private road and you have a private water line and you wanted to upgrade it so that the town were to take it over, you could request the town to basically front the money, and we would pay it back through the betterments that we collect from the property owners. So we currently do this for sewer lines. We technically don't have the authority to do it for water. So we've done it for 3 or 4 different times for sewer projects in town.
There's an issue with my road right now, so I will recuse myself from taking any position.
is
Any
that what
dis-
is precipitating this particular
No, I
article,
don't,
or-
I don't know, I don't think so, but I don't
That
know.
particular, there are several spots in town that have had this
There's several
issue.
areas that
Oh, okay,
potentially could benefit from this.
okay.
Brian?
So there's actually 2 sections, I'm sorry, there's 2 sections of law. One is allowing the betterment, and then the second section is indicating that we'll do the unit cost method, meaning that each property owner, depending on the length of road frontage they have, the cost will be based on their frontage.
And there's no downside to the town for this.
No, there isn't. No.
Getting the money back.
Kathy, any comments, thoughts? Ken? Have a motion?
You've got a motion?
Do we have a second?
Well, you know, I'm looking on 2 documents. What is this, number 16, 18, 17?
This now becomes 16.
16.
So it's the one that.
Motion to recommend Article 16.
Water betterment process.
Yeah.
Second.
Okay, moved by John Round, seconded by Kathy Bellata. Roll call vote. John Round,
Yes.
Brian Solacey,
Yes.
Kathy Bellata,
Yes.
Ann Harrison,
Yes.
and Becky Jakes recused herself. Okay, Article 17,
So now we get to the four zoning articles. So the planning board has recommended that four different articles be placed on the warrant. One is a new section for the bylaws regulating adult entertainment.
Excuse me, Becky?
Yes, Alan?
I think we skipped over new Article 17, which is adopting, allowing us to place liens on properties who fail to pay their water bills.
Yeah, we dropped that one, Alan.
Oh, I'm sorry, did I miss that? We dropped it?
We did a previously, or did we discuss it here?
We didn't discuss it here, but it's not on the new list.
I didn't put it on the new list, you're right. So there was a proposal for placing, an article to allow the placement of liens on water bills. In talking to staff, they feel like it would be beneficial to first improve our internal process of bill collection. And that once we have that solidly in place, then pursue this. So,
Okay, so that article is gone?
so that article is recommended that we don't pursue it for now.
Okay.
It's not on the
Thank
new
you.
list.
It's not in the new list.
Not on the new list.
Thank you, Alan, for making sure we're not missing things.
Well, I do my best.
And your best is always the best. Okay, Article
So now
17.
that brings us to the four zoning articles. One of them, as I say, is to establish a new section 8.6, talking about adult entertainment and what provisions would be followed. This allows adult entertainment only in the limited commercial district, the area across the highway. So that's one. The second article was to rewrite Section 12, the administration section of the bylaws, updating them, clarifying it, providing a new provision for associate members to the planning board, be appointed by the planning board to serve for special permit reviews, and site plan reviews if a regular member has to recuse themselves or is absent, or if there's a vacancy. So that's a second recommendation from the planning board. A third one is to create a new zoning section allowing senior housing throughout the community as a special permit. And then the fourth one were proposed amendments to the section on accessory dwelling units, ADUs. And the changes there, twofold. One is to forego the current requirement that requires a double lot size in order to have an ADU. Instead, it would allow a conforming lot size in that district to proceed with an ADU. And then the second change would be, instead of limiting it to homes that were built prior to 1984, it would allow any home to have an ADU after it's been in existence for 5 years.
And then is there still a lease requirement?
Yes, and then a minimum of 12-month lease for that, for the non-owner occupied unit.
I have some concerns about 3 of the 4 articles, primarily because the information we received from the Attorney General regarding the last town meeting and the amendments made there came in late. We just received it. And I have concern, my concern is that I don't want to have a repeat of the last town meeting. I think as far as the adult entertainment article goes, it's a proactive as opposed to a reactive amendment, bylaw. which I think is easy to understand and very straightforward. Anyway, that's my feeling.
So just to explain a little bit, so when the voters approved the amendment back in the fall, those have to be sent to the Attorney General's office. The Attorney General's office has to approve those amendments before they become official and legal. So they have, I forget, it's 90 days or 120 days to do that review. So we just finally received them 2 weeks ago. So we haven't had that new base of information on which these amendments apply. So it has added to confusion because we haven't had those new approved zoning article or bylaws on the website because we've been waiting for that approval. We don't want to put them up before they were approved. So it has added to the confusion that's out there. So that's.
And Sarah, I
news.
will get to you. And I just feel we need to be very clear with what the information that we are bringing forward. I know that the planning board has been working like dogs to get this. I hope that's not derogatory, because I love dogs and they work very hard. Anyway, I'm gonna let that go. So, John Round, thoughts, comments?
Yeah, so it's, right now, for.
John, if I could just.
Yeah, go ahead.
If I could just set the stage a little bit more.
Oh, sorry.
So the planning board has voted to recommend these be put on the warrant. They're not petition articles, citizen petition articles. It's your warrant, so you ultimately have the authority to determine what goes on the warrant. So that's your call. The alternative to not putting them on is to put them on and then moving to pass over. That would be the alternative approach. So I think those are your two options before you. Either you decide tonight that you don't want to put them on despite what the planning board has recommended, or you could go ahead and put them on and then have further discussion with the planning board about possible decisions to pass over certain ones that you put on. So I just wanted to give that context before you all jumped in.
May I go out of order? I think it would be a very bad precedent for us to decide that an independent board with specific knowledge and understanding of zoning, they made a recommendation that these go on. I think it should be up to them to defend them. As you said, the school can defend its own budget. The planning board voted to put these on, and specifically on the subject of the not having the current zoning bylaws completely up on the website. I'm trying to find it. The one that describes the ADUs is in a section that's not changed. So what's on the website is accurate for that. I think requiring that the whole bylaw be completely up to date when you're changing a small piece that hadn't been changed is a very high requirement. And I would like to see us support the planning board.
Kathy?
I'm a little conflicted on this one, because I agree with you, and I'm not in favor of standing in the way of what another board wants to put forward, and they made the decision. I am concerned, though, about the level of confusion. And one of the things that and I apologize, I did miss the public forum on these, when it happened on a Monday night, I couldn't be there. One thing I've heard the residents ask for repeatedly is pictures, some rendering, some stick drawing, something other than complicated verbiage. that's my source of concern. I just feel like the residents gave us some feedback. And I just haven't seen evidence of that yet. But I agree with Ann that, you know, an independent board has approved these, and I'm also uncomfortable with standing in the way of that. So I just need a minute to thank you.
Brian?
To that point, I agree, okay,
Mhm.
as far as the independent board. However, I think that to avoid what we saw last fall, which was a lot of confusion, and I think that it would be a disservice to the planning board, all right, because again, if there's confusion, people are not going to support it, all right? And all that work you've done for the last 3 years will have been for naught. I think that, I don't know if there's reason to have wholesale changes. If we can take a couple of different bites at the apple over the course of the next 18 months and get it right. And I'm not saying it's wrong, I'm just saying it's gotta be, and I've said this before, and this is not meant to be derogatory, I'm the lowest common denominator. And if I don't understand it, a lot of people aren't gonna understand it. And there's still a lot of things I don't understand. And my experience is if I don't understand something, I'm not voting for it. So my preference and the best interest would be, let's take a little bit at a time.
John Round?
Yeah, I think we're going after too many items here. I've got no problem with adult entertainment. I think people understand that. The administrative thing, I think you can because you're not really changing things to any great extent in terms of policy. I don't have a problem with that. But to put both ADUs and senior housing in there, I think that's a lot for people to get their head around. And I prefer to do it one at a time and see how things go. With ADUs, in fact, I guess I did ask, I think, Betsy, I don't know how many, based upon the property size, which I think you voted to be twice the minimum, I think, which is what exists. I don't know how many lots are affected by that particular requirement. Does that change the bottom line here particularly? And that's something that people would ask questions about, I would think, at the.
I'm gonna jump in here for a second. I didn't in any way mean to say I don't support the planning board and what they do. Having been on the planning board, I certainly appreciate deeply what they do. But we own the warrant, and if we allow or support items to come to the warrant that we're not completely comfortable with, as we've gone through this list and had a couple other things taken out already, then I don't know that we're really doing our job. Ann?
I'd just like to make, in the article on ADUs, as it stands, it's twice. They're proposing modifying it to just the required lot size in the district. So clearly, John didn't understand.
Okay, so that it was voted for just the minimum lot size.
That's what the planning board has proposed, yes.
Okay.
So.
And therein lies some of the problem. We have confusion right here. And we want to bring this forward to put it on a town warrant.
Well, then, let me, an administrative section, which is our current, as the bylaws are currently on the website, is, Article 7, is.
Section.
Section 7. Now, there's a little confusion because this refers to section 12, which is newspeak. And, but I would think that between now and the town meeting, it could be explained that if you want a comparison between what Article 7 on the website says and what Article 12 is proposed to say in this bylaw, I think that's something that could be done.
But again, we're finalizing the warrant tonight, and if we're not completely clear, Ron Mastrogiacomo, Chair of the Planning Board, has his hand up.
Yeah, would you consider moving the warrant forward, and then I would have a meeting with our board for reconsideration on certain articles based on Attorney General not getting information promptly. We would maybe recommend changing a few, maybe passing over a couple, or having the board maybe reconsider.
So potentially passing over on the,
The ones that we really haven't vetted,
on the
gotten
floor?
education, we might do that. I don't know if we can do that ahead of time, but I may have the board reconsider that on Monday. Would that be something you guys would consider doing?
We can't change the warrant after tonight.
Understood, but we could pass over
So,
if we just,
we could pass over on the floor.
and we could say that we will make our recommendation on town meeting floor.
Okay, thank you, Ron, yes. Sarah Melish has her hand up. Sarah?
Yes, so with respect to the old Article 22, I'm concerned with the wording with respect to number 3. And I think that the wording that lease of at least 12 once month should have a caveat of whether it is leased. Because what the ZBA has seen is the ADUs are for parents, funding enhancements to their children's homes, and there's no lease involved.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, Sarah.
I have a question.
Yes.
On Article 20, with the old Article 20, again, I think, the
Which
administrative.
is now 18, right? Are we up to 8?
17.
It wasn't in the, I didn't see it in the new package at all, so that's why I lost track of my numbering.
This is administration?
Yes, that's the
Okay.
question, that's the one I have a question on. My question is, this is requesting to add the ability to have alternate members for special permit reviews, et cetera, and define the makeup and role of the planning board. So I guess what my question here is there any governance crossover here? I guess if for some reason a member of the planning board, resigns, right, like recently happened, it was the select board who made the appointment,
It's a
right?
joint, it's joint.
Joint, right? But we had a role to play there?
Right.
And so my question, I didn't see any role of the select board in that, the way this particular article was proposed.
That's
And so I
correct.
didn't understand if there was possibly a governance conflict here. So I agree with Anne that I think we could limit confusion on this one and put it forward. However, I'm not exactly sure I agree with it. So I just wanted to get that governance question sorted
How
out.
about if we just say we will
So, okay.
make our recommendations
Recommendation.
on the floor for the 4 planning board articles? Does that make sense?
It does to me.
Yeah,
Okay.
I think I'm comfortable with that. Just under, one last question on logistics. So we would just listen to the town debate on the floor and not, how would you go,
Well,
I'm trying to
no.
understand,
So-
what does it mean for the board to make a recommendation on the floor? Are there additional steps? So,
Well, you typically
Alan's
would,
got his hand up.
okay.
Yeah.
Alan?
Logistics help.
Thank you. Just to answer Kathy's question before I go any further, the procedure normally would be that if the warrant and the finance committee pamphlet says that you'll make your recommendation on town meeting floor, then you would have your recommendation ready when the meeting opens, and at the beginning of the discussion of that article, I would either state your recommendation for you or recognize a member of the select board to state it. So it would come very early in the discussion, not after the discussion has taken place.
Okay, so we would be discussing this at a meeting between now and town meeting. Thank you.
Yes,
That was my question.
yes,
Thank you.
and the planning board I would assume be doing the same, deciding whether they would move to pass over. I'm gonna go a little bit outside of my lane here and offer some unasked for advice, and free advice is worth what you pay for it, so take it with a grain of salt. But I think, given the tenor of discussions on important issues in the town right now, it's important to the extent possible, for town boards to reflect a unified posture and comity between the boards. No one is more anxious than I am to avoid a repeat of last fall's town meeting. And I think we will enhance the prospect of having a better meeting if there isn't, at the outset, division among town boards. So I would encourage you to consider a process that will allow you and the planning board, that is the select board and the planning board, to come together over common recommendations before we get to April 3rd.
Thank you for your wisdom, Alan. It's always greatly appreciated.
Well, I have plenty of age, not so much wisdom.
I know that is not the case. Chris Olney from the planning board.
So I just want to say, I don't speak for myself here, but the only person more interested in not having confusion at the planning board more than Alan is us, I think, me. So that's certainly the case. In terms of section 12, the reason we want associate members is because it takes 5 members to approve a special permit. So if we didn't have 3 members there, the special permit would be automatically approved by statute. So we want to make sure we have members that we can appoint. And the reason we want the planning board to appoint them is because the associate members we would be appointing for a special permit, we would hope would be people with expertise in that particular special permit case. So we just want to be able to tailor associate members to the special permits that we're looking at.
Thank you, Chris. Sarah Mellish, you have your hand up?
Yes, so with respect to the members of the planning board, it's my understanding that historically, there were 5 members and 2 alternates. And at some way along the line, they changed that, but I'm not sure it was ever approved by the town. And I think we need to look at the history and see whether there are really 5 members of the board and 2 alternates rather than 7 members of the board.
Okay,
Thanks.
thank you, Sarah.
Actually, Peggy, actually Sarah is right. The current section 5 does not describe the planning board at all. Although there is some written history from 1931 or something, a handwritten note, but that's all we're relying on right now. So that's another good reason to approve the new section 12 so we can establish a real planning board.
But I don't see that you can.
Sarah, let's just.
Sorry.
That's okay. Go ahead, Sarah.
I don't see that you can change the conjunction of the board without a bylaw change.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
All right, are we comfortable with,
I'd like to just touch one more thing.
Yes.
On this, is that we have elected members of the planning board, and then they're gonna select, why don't we just have, just expand the size of the board? And allow two alternates, as opposed to allowing, we're electing members of the planning board. I don't think.
now we're
that-
talking about a whole different
Okay, I'm
thing.
just saying, but.
So
but
it's-
But that radical.
And
I have a question for anyone from the planning board here. For what Chris just said, it sounded as if these alternates would be selected for a particular case and not become regular members, so that a particular case came up and required knowledge of riverine.
Good word.
Yeah. And that they would serve on that issue and not become, and if another issue came up, someone else would be chosen.
But that's not just a minute, please, Chris. That's not stated in this. And one of, sorry,
I think it says 3 years, 3-year appointments, isn't it?
Correct, that's right.
Staggered.
yes. And that's of concern where we have, when appointees are needed, we play a part in that. And from having been on the planning board and now on the select board, I have a lot of concerns with that level of autonomy in how the board creates itself for, say it again?
It's gonna be almost a self-fulfilling prophecy, it's
That's
gonna be-
exactly,
they're-
and I,
it's
right.
They're gonna continue on a path as opposed to.
Which is, I mean, I think that that's why we have both boards working together. And that's my biggest concern with this. So that said, I would like to take the recommendation of the planning board chair, which is to make our recommendations on the floor for the 4, unless we want to go ahead and approve or support the adult entertainment.
Could we take them one at a time? I'm not sure, I personally, I think for some of them, I would be perfectly fine putting it out on the floor. And another one, I might suggest that we give our recommendation at the town meeting and, so I'm just not sure I have a blanket yes or for all 4.
Well, it's not a yes or a no. And then for the remainder, and the chair of the planning board has made a recommendation to us that we wait.
So I respect that, I do. I guess the one I'm most uncomfortable with is the one we just discussed because of the governance issues, and I would I would prefer not to have a governance technical discussion on the town meeting floor. We haven't talked through this one at all, I think. So that's the one I'm really uncomfortable not adhering to the planning board chair's
Okay,
recommendation.
can I make a suggestion?
Yeah.
That we take the first 2 articles, now number 17 and 18, and discuss those, and then make our recommendations regarding Article 20, the 19 and 20 on the floor.
I'm good with that.
Okay, so with that said, on Article 17,
What is
Adult
17?
What is
that
17?
is
Administration.
The
That's the one
administrative,
that Kathy's
administration one.
uncomfortable with.
Okay.
Kathy, would you like to make a motion on that one?
I would move that we not put this on the warrant for the April town meeting. Is that the right wording of my motion?
It's fine.
Yeah.
I think I know what she's saying. I think I second that.
Okay, moved by Kathy Bellata, seconded by Brian Solacey. John Round,
Yes.
Brian Solacey,
Yes.
Kathy Bellata,
Yes.
Ann Harrison,
No,
and Becky Jake says yes. Okay, Article 18,
Article now 17.
no, that was 17.
No,
Now-
No, that was 18.
That was that
was
that was
17.
That was
17 and we
17.
dropped
And
it,
you dropped it.
so.
Oh, yes, so
Now
now
we're
we're
back
on to
on
17. Holy guacamole. Okay, this is
I wasn't good at math.
pertaining to adult entertainment. May I have a motion?
I move that we recommend approval of Article 17, which is describing adult entertainment regulations.
I like the way you worded that.
Okay, moved by Ann Harrison, seconded by Kathy Bellata. Roll call vote, John Round.
Yes.
Brian Solacey. Kathy Bellata.
Yes.
Ann Harrison.
Yes.
And Becky Jake says yes. So, with the last two articles, 18 and 19 pertaining to the planning board, may I have a motion to make recommendation on the floor?
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Ann Harrison, seconded by Kathy Bellata. Roll call vote, John Round.
Yes.
Brian Solacey.
Yes.
Kathy Bellata.
Yes.
Ann Harrison.
Yes.
And Becky Jake says yes. Okay,
So you did both of those together?
yes, we did.
Okay, so senior housing and ADUs
We're
are on the warrant, but you'll make your recommendation from the floor.
correct.
So the only one you're not putting on the warrant is section 12.
Correct.
Yes.
The administrative.
Yeah.
Discuss it Monday.
And now that brings us to thank you all very much.
Yep.
And I hope you do feel we support you all.
Look forward.
Have a good night.
Yeah.
Thank you all. Enjoy the rest of your evening. Night. Okay, on to Article, I have no idea. I think it's 19.
This is Article 20.
It's 20.
It is 20. Okay, there we go.
I'm sorry, 21.
I am
What is
All right,
it?
we'll just,
Okay, the article to see what sum of money the town will vote to appropriate, et cetera, et cetera.
I move that we make our recommendation on town meeting floor on the sum of money.
Second.
Okay, moved by Ann Harrison, seconded by Kathy Bellata. Roll call vote. Ann Harrison?
Yes.
Kathy Bellata?
Yes.
Brian Solacey?
yes.
Yes.
John Round?
Yes.
And Becky Jake says yes. Okey dokey, now we come up to a grant of easement. Well, before we do that, you want to go back to governance project update and
I think
committees or
Alan has- I
move
think
that?
Alan has a question.
Oh, I'm sorry, Alan.
Thank you, Becky. Just one other set of questions, which I don't propose that we address tonight, given the hour. But at some point, I will need to know for the select board articles, who are the movers and seconders and potential speakers. And my thought is, rather than take up time at a future meeting of the select board, that I work that out with Greg and Becky, if that's okay with everybody.
Sounds like a plan. Thank you, Alan.
Sounds good to me. Thank you.
Good night.
Oh, am I free to go now?
You are free to go.
Okay, well, good luck. Thanks,
Say
thank
hi
you
to
all.
Charlotte. Thank you.
Thanks, good night.
Okay, this easement. We didn't get to the fire apparatus.
Right. That was before consent. So we had the consent
Okay,
items.
so we will put the governance project update and committees on the 20th, if everybody's amenable to that.
Honestly, 10 seconds, we're just in the process of collecting information from the committees now, and what I'd like is the action to put us on the agenda for the April 18th meeting. So we're collecting information over the next few weeks from the committees and doing some analysis and plan to have recommendations.
Excellent.
That's really all I need.
Okay, so we'll go to 418 on that.
And to that point, the one question that was on the,
Oh, for
on the
Hope.
table, for Hope, we'll put that off until after that is all.
What I could do is engage her, and we could invite her to the meeting we're having with the board and committee chairs, if she would like to attend, just for informational purposes, so she can see what it's like.
Is that the 22nd one?
Yes, it's
Okay.
Monday.
Yeah.
So we could do that in the interim. But other than
Okay.
that, I don't think we're gonna be able to talk any more about it until April 18th.
So the governance project goes to 418. All righty, there we go. Fire department apparatus. Chief, you've been hanging in there. All right.
So there's currently been, discussions on different approaches. Last fall, voters approved funds for a second ambulance. I think there's been a change of heart on that. And the preference is to have one of the, either the squad or the engine. I think the preference is for the engine, the pumper, the big pumper, to become a non-transport ambulance, a class 5, I think is what you call it. So that it can respond at a paramedic level, but someone else would come transport if there was a simultaneous call. So that means you would get rid of the old ambulance, you would upgrade engine 1, do some modifications, $5,000 range.
Yep.
To allow it to carry the paramedic equipment. So that's two.
Excuse me, it still acts as a pump though, right? I mean,
Oh, yeah,
okay.
yeah, all it means is we would take a couple of the seats out of the cab and put in compartment space inside the cab for the ALS equipment.
Don't you need that, what was
No,
that?
it's not gonna transport, it's a non-transport.
Oh, good, thank you.
Even I understood that.
Just brings the people and the equipment.
Okay.
It can still carry 4 people.
So Greg, what are we actually being asked tonight? Because we don't have anything on the warrant, right? So what is the ask?
There were monies already approved
Okay.
for,
Well,
take it away.
There's money approved for the ambulance, but we're not gonna go
Right.
ahead with that. That can sit for where it is for now, and it can be put back into the apparatus fund. I think it makes sense to do that when you're ready to make a final decision on new ladder or whatever we're doing next. And
So what's the ask tonight?
the
is
ask
my
tonight
question.
is, what's the game plan for making the decisions?
Okay, so we're not making an actual decision to purchase tonight, we're just discussing the game plan.
So I think it'd be great to make decisions on getting rid of the old ambulance and upgrading engine 1 to be a non-transport class 5 ambulance.
And
So-
possibly also selling the,
Mini pumper.
So then there's the question of the mini pumper, you could decide to sell that. I think you ought to wait to make a decision on the ladder before you sell that mini pumper, but the chief can opine on that.
Yeah, DEP is coming to do their own evaluation on the emissions of the ladder on Wednesday. And then we'll have more information.
Did we
on
get
its-
any
on its
information
viability.
regarding the emissions? Remember, wasn't there a
So
possible?
that's what this is pursuing, this
Okay,
waiver.
Good.
Yeah, and we're also going to Detroit, the maker, through Power Products, who did the repairs on the ladder as well.
my first question is, I have a car that has no chance of passing emissions. It happens to be 50 years old. They don't test for emissions. I have heard that anything over 15 years,
Fire apparatus still needs to be tested because it still needs a valid inspection sticker, and for the commercial.
I get a
vehi-
valid
For
inspection.
the
sticker.
commercial vehicles, like I went through the MAC plan for the state. The state does not touch commercial or heavy vehicles. They'll only do passenger vehicles to help you get repairs in order to be able to pass emissions and keep your cars on the road and inspected. They do not deal with fire apparatus at all. And the Department of Environmental Protection is the sole agency that deals with the emissions point of the registry of motor vehicles. So the registry issues the final sticker, but the DEP are the ones that set the emissions levels and the ones that are able to investigate things like this. So we have to wait for their evaluation on Wednesday to see what relief they can provide.
Would it make sense to have, every time we talk about this, it just feels like we're talking about something different.
Yep.
Maybe it's just me, and maybe I'm just tired, but honestly, we've got a list of stuff that we have apparatus. It would be nice to see a plan for when we have to replace it, just one chart that
That's in
shows.
the capital.
No, it's here.
No, I,
Oh, sorry, lifespan of the,
lifespan, but just taking
So we
into
can put
account
that
the
in a chart
lifespan
form,
and
yeah.
a chart that says, here's where we need to make investments. And here's the recommendation today, and here's the decisions today.
So,
Because every time it's verbally communicated, I'm just hearing something different.
so the fundamental question in my mind is, do you want a ladder or not?
Okay,
So that doesn't require a chart.
no,
Um,
that's not what we were talking about a minute ago, so.
Right,
Again, it changes.
But I think that's what it, all right, so you need you need a frontline ambulance, you need a frontline pumper.
Yep.
That, I don't think there's any argument about that.
Yep.
Right.
We've got, the ambulance is 3 years old, it's got
Yep.
4 more years to go. We've got a pumper that's 12 years old, I think, 12 or 13.
Well,
12 years old, it's got another 8 years. So we're good on the pumper and we're good on the
Mhm.
ambulance.
Yep.
The ladder is 22 years old.
Mhm.
correct.
So if you want a new ladder, we need to, so there's a 2-year lead time minimum on a new ladder. So if we want a new ladder, then we need to be thinking about putting that order in. And you can make that decision at the fall town meeting, if that's your decision.
Right.
So that's the 3 basic frontline vehicles.
Right.
I'd like to see what happens on Wednesday.
Yeah.
Yeah,
You
that's
know,
what
Right.
We've gone 6 or 8 months without the ladder already, and I don't think anyone's really missed it. that I'm aware of.
Well, we have that, if the ladder had been in service, we wouldn't have had to borrow Linfield's pumper.
Okay,
Because the ladder doubles as a reserve engine when the engine's out of service, and the engine can run in place of the ladder, where the mini pumper can't.
I
The
understand that,
ladder
but-
can serve as a pumper?
Yes, it's
Yes.
equipped.
Another
It-
pumper's
It does
only-
everything.
Yes,
But another pumper's only $800,000 versus
Yeah, it's heavy.
$1.5 million for a ladder.
except by the time we need the pumper, it'll be 900.
But again, it's still not $1.5 million.
So again,
Mhm.
here's what we have, and here are a couple of options. Get a ladder, don't need this investment. Don't get a ladder. We can do these other things. This verbal back and forth on having a different conversation, I abstain if we're gonna take a vote tonight on anything. I just think it's not the best
It's just been a moving
way
target, because
Yeah.
we've had
make a
different
decision
information
of
coming
this
in, that's all.
magnitude.
So I think the 2 pieces of critical information are what's the status of the existing ladder.
And what ladders are used for, because if we are considering not having one, we better understand what they are used for, what is their unique purpose.
But there may be an alternative to having a ladder,
Exactly,
which is sharing a ladder.
right,
Right,
and
but
I would
that's-
like to see those options laid out instead of a verbal, pickleball game, which is what this feels like.
Well, maybe by Wednesday we'll know.
Right. But
The other thing that I would really like to see is, as we are going toward a fairly significantly staffed fire department, it would be nice to have a second non-transport ambulance. And if that's
Mhm.
$5,000,
Yep.
put it into the existing engine.
Mhm.
I'd
The
like to
mini
go ahead and do that and not
I agree.
have to call in an outside ambulance if there's a second medical emergency.
And get rid of ambulance 1,
Get rid of ambulance 2, or the old ambulance.
the old ambulance,
get rid of old ambulance, there we go.
ambulance 2.
Okay, ambulance,
Call it old
thank
and
you.
older.
And modify engine 1
Correct.
for $5,000.
5 to 10, we have to get specs on the compartment.
Okay.
And the target moves.
Now you're gonna be in those goalposts.
Well, we don't, they have to look at the truck to measure everything and
But
give,
the
so
numbers
that's,
you gave us
that's
said,
the price range. It depends, we have to get different vendors, there's different vendors that do it, there's different configurations that I can get you I don't have any specific quotes.
well, it's right here, you know, about 5,000 in expense. But now you're saying 5 to 10,000.
That was the ballpark without quotes because nobody came in to give us an estimate by looking at the truck and we didn't take it anywhere to have it
Again,
measured and.
This is why it would be very helpful just to have a clean set of charts so that we're all looking at the same numbers instead of referring back to emails that were sent, whatever. So it just would be very helpful.
Okay, so I think we get Wednesday's information, and do we bring this back to the 20th? Okay.
In the interim, can you try to get us a hard number on the retrofit?
I will certainly try.
Is there funding somewhere that would cover an expense of $5,000 to $10,000 without having to go through the town meeting?
So, yes.
Where?
I think you could use the funds that were approved last fall for ambulance, it said repair or purchase. I think
Oh,
this would
that's-
qualify as an ambulance repair.
Okay,
Thank you.
all right,
Then we can turn the
good
rest
point,
of it.
Ann. All right,
Good idea, yeah.
Sarah Mellish has a comment. Sarah?
Yes, said we've spent thousands of dollars trying to figure out how to rehab the fire equipment. And it could have been done, the ambulance 2 could have been saved for 22,000. The pumper is 25,000. And the ladder is who knows what, but we're not saving our equipment appropriately.
I didn't catch that last comment. I couldn't quite hear.
Okay, Sarah, thank you very much.
Okay. So, what we're asking for now, if I understand, is a list of the equipment, its age, when it needs to be replaced. And
Cost, the financial
Mhm.
point at which we would need to invest to replace that equipment, right? And the approximate cost.
So,
And then the recommendations, couple of alternatives for us to,
Right, a quick.
written alternatives. That
Right.
we can say, I like option 1, I like option, or I
Right.
like option 2,
A
instead of
quick, a
us.
quick place to look at the graph is that the ladder truck has a 20-year life, and in 2021 would have been ready for replacement. Was asked to get it to 2026. So if it's back on the road, that was the target date that was listed. If we need to replace it in 2026, we'd have to order one in 2024. The ambulance, I wanted a 5-year replacement, we've
Chief,
gone to a.
I'm sorry, can we get this written down for us?
Yes.
As opposed to going over this?
I'm just saying, it's in the capital plan, if you look, I put the amounts in there for what we would need in what year, for what type of apparatus.
But we wanna, I wanna see if we even need a ladder. That's one of the things I wanna discuss at some point. And also, I just one question for you, Chief.
Sure.
In the event that the ambulance goes down, the transport can still act as a first responder and then just wait for transport from someone else?
The engine, yes, the engine can
Yeah.
go.
All right, so-
Similar like it does now.
Okay, so engine one, so the town is still covered with an emergency responder. Professional paramedic showing up at might not be able to be transported, but they can stabilize.
Yes, that's what we do now.
Okay.
With another vehicle, with other vehicles right now.
Okay, thank you,
That's what you do right now? Without
Without ALS equipment, yes, my car is equipped with BLS equipment and a defib,
It's not-
the
it's not
engine's
ALS.
currently
But we
equipped.
want ALS.
Right.
So it's not what you're doing now.
No, but a first responder is still going to the scene and rendering care. That's what I was referring to. There are paramedics going, they don't have all the paramedic equipment, but they will.
But the new when we,
Make it a non-transport class 5,
it'll
it
be,
will
it'll
have
be
all
ALS.
the same.
It'll have ALS, we just have to wait for transport.
Yes, correct.
Yeah.
That's what I want to hear. Thank you.
Okay.
So again, tonight's votes, green light to sell old engine, get rid of old engine.
Old
I'm sorry,
ambulance.
old
Old
ambulance.
ambulance.
Old ambulance.
Number 2.
And to modify engine
1.
1 as a non-transport ambulance, class 5.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, moved by Ann Harrison, seconded Brian Solacey. Roll call vote, John Round,
Yes.
Brian Solacey,
Yes.
Kathy Bellata.
Abstain.
No, I-
Ann Harrison and Becky Jakes votes yes, so.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Chief. When I vote, we go to consent agenda. Chief, thank you very much.
Thank you, yeah.
Does anyone want to pull anything out?
I haven't read the minutes.
I haven't seen the minutes.
Well, that's why I didn't read them.
Oh, they were in there.
I looked,
There was
It was a
sent-
separate,
it was
separate
sent
file.
separately with
Yeah.
all the
which
zoning.
email should I be looking at?
The latest.
The Friday email with the zoning.
Friday with the zoning.
It came from Greg.
Okay, well,
Yep.
I can't approve them. I could abstain if you want to take a vote.
All right.
It just said draft on it, it did not say minutes.
It's a draft.
It said
Does
draft
anybody
2
else
or
need,
draft
you
1.
want to abstain?
I just assumed.
You want to pass them over to the
Oh,
next
let's pass
time?
them over to the next time.
Okay, all right. And I sent in some very minimal changes and then there was just some, okay. So we put those to 320 consent agenda. The National Grid easement,
So this is the easement that was part of the
Yep.
upgrade up at the old landfill
Mhm.
for the new compost. We just, it was an oversight when you approved National Grid's work up there. We should have approved the easement at the same time.
okay, so, Ann,
I was going to, why don't we leave it in the consent agenda?
I'm sorry.
We can vote on the consent agenda
Okay.
other than the minutes.
All right, so may I have a motion to approve the consent agenda less the minutes from February 21st of '23?
So moved.
Second.
Roll call, moved by Ann Harrison, seconded Kathy Bellata. Roll call vote, John Round,
Yes.
Brian Solacey.
Yes.
Kathy Bellata,
Yes.
Ann Harrison,
Yes.
and Becky Jakes says yes. Okay, town administrators report.
Just a couple of quick items. Chamber meeting for Manchester. Welcome to attend next Thursday, the 9th at 9 at Bravo. There's in your packet a letter updating the litigation efforts on PFAS. A while ago, you approved joining, actually, it's a national effort. It'll slowly wind its way through, and we'll get occasional updates. And this is one of those updates, nothing earth-shaking in there, it's slowly winding its way through. Harbor management plan we talked about, Brian will give us a couple more names, we're close to having a full complement.
Did you get Jim Dietrich's name? Jim sent us an email.
I'll double check.
Okay,
I'll double
just
check.
want to be sure of that.
Yep, thank you for that reminder. Escape by the Sea, very successful first round.
You did a really nice
Sunday,
job.
when I talked to Lisa Bartlett over at Captain Dusty's, and she said that she raised $400 or $500, and that Bally's did a great business that day.
Oh, it's good to hear.
Yay, that's wonderful.
That's what we wanted to,
Yeah.
Go
that was the hope.
Tiffany.
Yeah,
It was,
well, Tiffany's done a fabulous job with this, she's worked
Yes.
very, very hard on it.
Yes, she has.
The weather obviously didn't cooperate on Saturday, but Friday and Sunday were both
and
successful
there was,
days.
there was a lot of little kids around there.
Yeah.
And
A lot of little
that's
kids bring
what
their
we
parents.
Yeah. So, again, this week, she was gonna try to set something up for Wednesday, because there's a half a day of school. I'll have to double check with her on that, but certainly next Friday, Saturday, and Sunday again, as well.
Hopefully, weather.
Yes, yeah, hopefully get decent cooperation.
Mhm.
And, yeah, item 5, you can, just FYI.
Okay,
That'll do it for me.
all right. Any other
Business not anticipated. No.
business not anticipated? Thank you, Ann. Motion to adjourn then, please.
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Ann Harrison, seconded Brian Solacey. Roll call vote. John Round?
Yes.
Brian Solacey? Kathy Bellata?
Yes.
Ann Harrison?
Yes.
And Becky Jakes says yes at 10:39. Everybody, thank you very much who attended this evening and endured. We'll see you next time. Bye.
All I know is I'm going out.
6:00.